Hey, welcome back to another episode of VFX Artists React. Okay, hey, what's up, everybody? We have a very special podcast today because we want to teach you how to build your very own open source equivalent of a OneWheel, which we like to call a VESC.
Yes,
VESC.
our personal preference is to call it VESC.
That definitely didn't come from anywhere online or anyone else. Started here.
Now, people listening to this be like, well, I don't need to build a OneWheel or have any desire to build a OneWheel. Should I just get out this podcast? To which I reply, no, wait, listen. Not only are we going to talk about how to build a VESC, we're also going to share the stories of how we built our own VESCs, because Wren and I have done it. We have our wheels right here, and they're super cool.
Yeah.
And they're super awesome, and building them was quite a journey.
So we built these like 2.5 months ago-ish. Around that time, it was like mid-July or so. I'd just broken my hand, and we built these things. It was around the same time we did the previous podcast about OneWheels, which was all about my broken hand and various other OneWheel related things. There has since been wakes from that podcast, and I know OneWheel related stuff is not generally super, I guess, I don't know what, interesting, applicable to most of our viewers. So this is going to be a little bit more of a tailored podcast, kind of like that.
A little inside baseball, but it's very important to us. And I feel like people like hearing you talk about what you're passionate about, friend.
Yeah. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this podcast, Jan, is because the three of us, at least within our own core group of friends, like we're the three that ride the most.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're the ones who are always down for rides, and we usually do it like once a week, maybe more, usually at like 9 p.m. at night and go till like 1 in the morning.
It depends on how
meet up at a mountain somewhere.
How far I've been traveling that week, but yeah. No, and we often use the term three board skateers.
What? We never use that term.
We have used it every single time.
He uses the informal phrase of we, which means me. Because it all started off years ago with you, me, Clint, and Cliff, and we call ourselves the Four Boardsmen. Mm-hmm. Since then, we've expanded to well over a dozen of us, like probably closer to 20, but there's usually only like 8 of us that really like respond to the text threads anymore.
the core riding group. And then honestly, most rides we do are at night, just because if you don't know, LA is pretty strict about their single track electric devices on single track parts of the city. So we tend to do it all at night. And usually at 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, you can only get us 3 on board, maybe 1 or 2 other people.
Yeah, so we OneWheel a lot. I would say there's nothing else in the world I am obsessed with more than the OneWheel and one-wheeling. Mm-hmm. Seriously, I thought I would have gotten tired of this by now, but the opposite has happened. I just continue to get more and more into it, to the point that I went to Float Life Fest for a 2nd year in a row, which is basically a giant event, festival for OneWheels. Like 500 or 600 one-wheelers showed up to Arkansas, frickin' Bentonville, Arkansas, just to hang out, one-wheel around, do some races and whatnot, and it was the best time ever.
And people are probably wondering, like, well, what's so great about OneWheels? And there's a lot of reasons, but kind of the main reason is it's a really great mode of transportation, especially in a city, that can handle things like mountains and like mountain bike single track. It's got power, it's got a lot of range. And the thing is, like, when you get to a place, you can pick it up and carry it with you inside.
Which is big.
It's really
huge.
Special.
Yeah, you don't have to deal with what a bicycle would be or worry about theft or anything. I use the metro a lot in LA. Being able to just pick up your means of transport, go into the metro, get halfway across the city, and then use your electric skateboard to do the rest of it. It's incredible. There's no device outside of an electric unicycle that'll get you through all that terrain as quickly.
But even then, I'd argue that a OneWheel is more nimble for city riding than an EUC.
Sure. You also look way cooler. Way cooler, dude.
Definitely do not disagree with that.
Something about that side profile, that snowboarder profile, just...
I mean, I keep thinking that I agree with you on that front, Niko, that like a OneWheel is more versatile than an EUC, electric unicycle. We call them EUCs. But just when I really start to believe that, I see someone do the craziest stuff on an EUC. I'm like, oh, wow. I mean,
Well,
so
when I say more versatile, I mean like when you're waiting at the corner for the light to change, you can be on the one wheel and standing on it. You can do a little dually loop, and like on the EUC, you have to like get off it or have incredibly good balance.
Also, if you're gonna go onto the metro, I'm not gonna take an EUC down a flight of stairs. They're like 60 pounds or something. Whereas a one wheel, even though the GTs and the VESCs are not light by any stretch of the imagination, you can still pick them up.
Yeah.
It's not going to require you to take an
But the
elevator.
EUCs have like a little handle that fold up, and then you can just walk it like a luggage thing.
Sure.
So one wheels are great is what we're trying to get to.
Yes,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah.
Say comparing a one wheel to an electric skateboard, which have like the smaller wheels, 4 of them. And, I rode a boosted board for 2 years before I got a one wheel. I loved them. And I cannot go back because the versatility of the diameter of the tire, it allows it to go over a huge amount of types of terrain, a huge variety of terrain. Rocks, bumps, going up curbs, going off curbs, going off big curbs. Like you can't really do any of that on an electric skateboard. And so I think we're all on the same page of that. Like this is the most versatile personal electric vehicle you can possibly have.
Yep. So we've been waiting for Future Motion to come out with an updated version of a one wheel for a long time. And they finally came out with a step up this past winter or so, which was the GT. Now, what I was hoping for in a one wheel, the GT didn't quite go all the way to the point of what I was looking for. But like I'm like the kind of guy who's looking for like the high end electric mountain bike. And most people aren't looking for that, right?
Yeah,
It's like, I want a tire that I want a one wheel that can take me up a staircase. And most people are like, look, we'll just settle for like a steep hill. And that's plenty. And like that accounts for like 99% of people.
Sure.
And I feel like Future Motion made a great one wheel in the GT that actually is very capable, but it's not like the extremely high end, extreme sports version of the thing that I was looking for. And likewise, there's people that like doing tricks. There's people that like doing all terrain riding. Like there's a whole bunch of different people getting into the sport. Now imagine only having like 2 bikes in existence and one company that makes them, because Future Motion has the patent on one wheels, or at least the design of them. When you say one wheels, I need to be specific here. It is a brand name. The term one wheel is a brand name for Future Motion's devices. What we have here, trademarked. What we have here on the table in front of Wren, that is not a one wheel. That is a VESC. And we are going to confuse the terms at times, and just bear with us.
Because it's so easy just to call it a one wheel. We call it a
great
VESC
name.
because the name is VESC. It stands for Vetter Electric Speed Controller. Vetter is the name of the dude who invented the open source electronic speed controller system. I think it's also called like variable electronic speed control. It doesn't matter. VESC. ESC is a very common age-old type of controller for motors. It's what we call it. It's the name. Same thing is like, people forget that the one wheel is made by a company called Future Motion.
Sure.
And not by a company called One Wheel.
Yeah, sure.
So Wren, why did you build a VESC, especially as somebody who owns 2 GTs?
Well, because I am an addict and I need I
mean, you're not wrong.
Okay, yeah, exactly. I'm at a point in my life where I can afford a toy like this, because this is more like having one wheel. I wouldn't call a toy. I would call that a vehicle.
Sure.
Having multiple one wheels is a bit indulgent, and I'm at a point in my life where I'm prepared for that indulgence.
You have abundance. You're just
so for years we rode the OneWheel XR, which is an incredible device. Incredible, but it was out for years, and 2021 is starting to come to a close, and everyone's like, man, are they not going to announce like an updated version of the one wheel? Like, we want more power, we want more range. The last thing they updated, or the last thing they released, was the Pint, which is a smaller, more mainstream, more affordable version of a one wheel.
But not what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And it's also worth mentioning, we had modded our XRs.
I was going to say, there was an entire modding community where you could get aftermarket almost anything on the board, from rails to batteries. Batteries probably being the biggest jump ahead, because you could get a lot more range out of it, a lot more power, and so on and so forth. There were also growlers, modifications where people took the smaller pint motor or tire and put it onto an XR body,
and with shorter rails.
Absolutely. And you saw this big brewing customizing community that was not being thought of well by the future motion gods. The OneWheel makers did not really approve of any of this, and
they certainly weren't designing their boards to make it easy to do that,
to be able to respec them out.
Yeah.
Sure.
And at times they actively included counter modding measures.
Hello, everyone. I have something very special for this podcast's sponsor today. We have not only been graced with turning the podcast into a lordship, we also made a lordship for Sam.
No way.
Yeah.
Let me see this.
Yeah, so through today's sponsor, Established Titles, you can become a Scottish lord or lady. We purchased a 1 square foot plot of land at a private estate in Edelston, Scotland.
My goodness.
It's got its own plot number.
I see that.
And in tradition with the historic customs of Scotland, you can now be referred to as a lord.
Oh, snap, dude.
Yeah.
Dream come true. Time I go up there to get some poutine, I expect Lord to be my title.
And now, in accordance with Scottish tradition, you are a lord of the land.
Oh my goodness.
It's so official, in fact, that you can put it on different things that have a prefix to the title. You can put Lord Sam Gorski on something.
Oh, dude. Oh man. This has just made life much more fun.
This is a really cool way to help with not only just, a fun gift for friends and family, it helps with global reforestation efforts as well. They plant a tree for every square foot of land bought. They work with charities called One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. So that's another cool little thing. It's just in time for the holidays, and the first 200 people to use establishedtitles.com/CorridorCast will get a plot probably within walking distance from our plot.
Yes, which will be heavily fortified, so do not trespass.
Just huge thanks to them for sponsoring. This is a fun little thing, and I also have one here for Lord Corridor Casts. So if you're interested in getting your own lordship or ladyship, head on over to establishedtitles.com/CorridorCast, and you'll get 10% off.
Dude, in this market, damn.
All right, click the link in the description below. Back to the podcast.
Remember the charge and ride video we did several years ago where you and I rode from my house to the studio? You had just gotten the XR, which had just come out. I was still riding on the V1 from 2016. And there's a mod that I was able to do, which basically allowed me to take a battery in my backpack, go through a voltage conversion thing, and then trick the OneWheel into thinking it was being charged, even though I was riding it. Super sketch.
And you made a video about it?
We made a whole video about it. Future Motion was not pleased.
Do you and I guess, do you know why they're not pleased?
Okay, we will get to a lot of this in this podcast, including how to actually make a VESC, including all of the components and stuff. This will be a bit of a podcast here, but to answer your question,
And there are chapter markers.
Yeah,
if you want to just jump to the, but it's all good. You just keep listening.
Wait,
It's
I've
a
already
good
forgotten your
podcast.
question.
Why do you think Future Motion's reaction to the customization market has been so negative, I guess?
Well, okay, there's a bunch of sides to the story. One of them is that it's a bit of a mystery because they don't really communicate very much about their intents and sort of feelings about all this stuff. But really what it comes down to is liability and risk, because the moment we start modifying our boards, we introduce potential failures into the thing, which, on the surface doesn't seem like that big of a deal because it's like, well, I should be able to do my own thing. And if I mod it and break it, that's my fault. Great. What happens when you let someone else try it and then they get hurt? Whose fault is it then?
Sure.
Well, I would say it's the person who modified the board's fault, but there's been a lot of court cases that say, no,
But I
it's
don't wanna get
Future
sued.
Motion's fault.
It's like, sue them instead.
Yeah, because no one wants to get sued despite, kind of taking on the responsibility. Then something happens and you're like, oh.
And last time I checked, there was 70 open lawsuits against Future Motion.
Wow.
I didn't realize it was full on 70 though. I don't know where you saw that.
There was a site where you could actually look up open lawsuits, and there was like 70. I mean, maybe there's not 70 anymore. Maybe there's more. Needless to say, the lawsuits do exist.
Yeah.
And Future Motion is dealing with that. And they have a device that if it stops working when you're cruising along, you go down. And you hit the
Unlike a
ground.
skateboard or bicycle where when it dies, it becomes a skateboard or bicycle.
Yeah, it's like a helicopter where when it dies, you might die too. And to be fair, on a one wheel going 20 miles an hour, if it dies, you might die too. Like it's possible.
People have died doing that.
Every single person in this room has worn a cast or some form of we've all sacrificed something to our boards.
Literally, including Christian, who has a broken shoulder at this moment.
Currently, from the one wheel. Everyone in here knows how dangerous they can be. So I guess from Future Motion standpoint, they're seeing that liability, and they're in a space where they can only afford so many of these lawsuits.
Yeah.
So they're just, I guess, putting up as many obstacles in the way as they can to prevent you from modding a board.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that, you know, Future Motion, they are not inherently against modifications. What they're against is the types, is the right type of modification that could potentially destroy your one wheel or your life. You know, like once you start messing with the motor, the battery, or the controller that requires very specialized skill sets to even try to modify, that's when they're like, okay, no, don't do any of that.
Yeah, changing the tire, not a big deal. Bumpers,
Yeah.
not a big deal.
But it used to be for them, like back in the early days. You know, I made one of the first tire change videos on the internet for the one wheel. It certainly has the most views. And, you know, I had talked with Future Motion about that. And they're like, yeah, we're constantly getting people sending their boards in who are trying to replicate the mods that you have shown, but they're messing it up and expecting us to fix it under warranty. And it's like, people, yeah, I don't know. So they've since kind of relaxed that a little bit. I think the community has grown large enough that they've just decided to accept it. You can now change out tires on a one wheel
without voiding your warranty.
Without voiding the warranty. They even sell spare tires as well.
Sure.
At Race for the Rail this year, for the first time ever, they allowed people to ride with different tires on.
Oh, sick!
Yeah.
Sick. I wasn't aware.
Shout out to John Grace for apparently being a big guy pushing that forward.
Sick.
And yeah, so I think they are willing to, you know, be more open to accessorizing one wheels. And that's the clear thing. They're super down for accessories, not too into modifications. That's the sort of verbal distinction I was trying to clarify. So
what happens when you're a Wren Weichman and you love your one wheel and the GT comes out and you're like, this is nice, but I was hoping for 10 more volts in that battery pack. I was hoping for a different diameter tire. I was hoping for W-shaped rails. I was hoping for this and that and the other thing.
Well, to be clear, I wasn't really specifically hoping for anything. I just wanted a newer one wheel, and they delivered, and I absolutely love the GT.
So do I.
I think it is an incredible device.
Out
I think
of box, a stock GT is it's a beast. It's a beast. For those of you that don't know, its riding profile is a little. It's what we would call a little squirrelier. The point of contact between the wheel and the earth is smaller, so it's a little more nimble, perhaps harder to use in certain situations. But it did basically double the range, double the power, and added a bunch of fun new features that were pretty cool.
Technically, I know you're just
I'm just
saying casually.
Yes,
it didn't technically double the power. And when I got the GT, there's a trail near Glendale. It's in North LA, kind of between Glendale and Pasadena, right above the highway there. We call it the Dragon Spine.
Yes.
It's a wave-like trail that basically just goes up and down,
like a dragon sleeping on hills.
Yeah,
or riding its spine.
But these are very steep hills, and no one wheel we've had has ever been able to climb to the top of those hills. We get most of the way, and then you walk the rest of the way, like the final 20 feet or whatever, and then you ride down the backside and rinse and repeat on the next hill. And so I was like, oh man, the GT, I bet I can do it. I bet I can do it. And I'd been loving the GT. Like, it was so much fun. The power, like really being able to just push it and it just continues to give you the power was really great. But the GT could not handle those hills. It couldn't make it to the top. It could only just slightly do more than the XR.
Yeah, so let's get technical for a second here, because there's going to be technical people listening to this podcast, and we're trying to be technical. So one of the things that we're describing here is torque. Torque is basically the power that the wheel, the force that the wheel on the one wheel / VESC or whatever can put out. So imagine you're holding onto a stick that's been stabbed into the wheel, and it tries to spin. It's like, how much can it pull that stick away from your hands? That's torque. Now, speed is a little bit different. Speed is how fast can you be going and still have more to give? If you're going 20 miles an hour and you lean on that front of the one wheel to go faster, does it have more to give? And obviously you need some torque to be able to do that as well. But torque, especially low end torque when you're going slow, like you want to crawl over a bump, that comes from current, aka amperage. And speed, basically how fast you can go, comes from voltage. Basically, you need to have a high enough voltage that the motor can still, or the battery can still provide power when you're going faster.
That's a good way of putting it. It is slightly oversimplified.
It is slightly oversimplified.
It always still comes down to power.
Yeah, but long story short, the reason,
Sure.
so the GT did not have as much torque as I was expecting, mainly because it doesn't have the ability to put out more amperage. It has a little bit, it can do more amperage than the XR, but it can't just completely open those pipes because the batteries in these things can dump amps if you want them to. But the controller on the OneWheel GT doesn't let it dump amps. It lets it, open up a little bit, but it doesn't let it dump amps. However, the battery on the GT is a 72, 73 volt battery versus the 63 volt battery in the XR. So that extra 10 volts gives you a higher range at the high end. Plus the ability to actually put more current through it versus the XR. Lets you go faster. You have a little more torque at the low end, but you have a lot more torque at the medium to high ends versus the XR. Also partially due to battery construction.
So,
it gets kind of complicated.
And the reasoning for that is that there's an inverse relationship between torque and speed.
Mhm.
The faster you go, the less torque you have.
Mhm.
And this is a self-balancing device that uses torque to balance you.
Sure.
So the faster you go, the less ability it has to balance you. And that's where nosedives come from. People go really fast, and when you're going pretty fast and you lean forward just a little too far, you don't even have to lean that far forward. The board is still, if the frame of reference is like the side of the board and the world is just flying by, but the camera's like stuck to the person, the board still thinks you're leaning forward and is still trying to get underneath you. But when you're going fast enough, it doesn't have that torque, so you end up falling over. But if you're going really slow, especially the GT, it's like, it's got a ton of torque. You can lean pretty far forward and it'll still go. And that's created this whole movement called nose drags, where someone, it's in our Race for the Rail video from a couple years back. Basically, you push the nose down and you just ride it, and the motor continues to try to spin up, and
it's a nuts trick.
it's absolutely terrifying.
To those of you that do it, wow, good job, good on you.
So long story short, the GT's come out. It was a step up from the XR, but for many people, it's not what they're looking for because the GT is very much not moddable. You can swap a tire. That's about it.
That's about
it.
Yeah.
The GT it's a great board. They've added a lot of things to it that are really nice that I'm looking for, like the concave footpads. Ooh, I love them.
Oh, I love the
Incredible.
concave footpad. So many people are complaining about the footpads, but I really love them.
And that power on the board, it's a much stronger board than the XR. And if Christian had been riding the GT instead of the XR, his shoulder may still be with us today.
Because another thing is that like 20 miles an hour is kind of like the sweet spot for top speed.
Sure.
More or less. Obviously, these things can go faster because there's no such thing as a brake. You can't just artificially stop someone because these things work by using physics. And the moment you try to put a brake on this thing, it's going to throw you forward.
Yep.
I'm always surprised how many people just cannot grasp that concept. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there isn't such thing as a top speed. There's just a top torque.
Yeah,
sure.
And so 20 miles an hour is generally around the speed where it's like, oh, this feels pretty fast.
Yeah, I
kind of don't really want to go faster than this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so the GT and the XR kind of both have the same top speed, quote unquote. Technically, they can do more. The GT is very much so capable of going faster than the
20 miles
XR
an hour.
ever could.
Yeah.
I hit 27 miles an hour on the GT a couple weeks ago, and it was nuts. I was wearing protective gear, and I was very amped, and I do not try that often. But point being, 20 miles an hour on a GT is significantly safer than 20 miles an hour on an XR because it's got a lot more headroom to be able to give you that power. So it was a smart move on Future Motion's part in that regard because everyone's going to be riding in that window and the power within that window is more solid.
Yep. So the GT is definitely a safer board. However, if you're somebody who has ridden a lot of one wheels and you want to mod them and you have very specific things you're looking for, the GT may not scratch that itch. And because Future Motion's the only company making one wheel type devices, there's nothing else you can turn to. And especially with this winter, there's a lot of, I guess, anger over a lack of a right to repair aspect to these wheels. And you can send them in to Future Motion to have them fixed, but Future Motion's only in one spot. They don't have repair stations up anywhere else around the world.
For now.
They're working on it. It's not here yet. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's not here yet.
Yeah.
Once it's here, I'll
That's
change my tune. But, if you're somebody in Europe, if you're somebody in New York and you're using this as your daily commute and it breaks, well, you got to ship your wheel all the way to California. No, screw that. You want to just take it to a shop and fix it right then and there.
Sure.
Like, there's a lot of need and a lot of desires for things that people want that aren't necessarily being scratched by Future Motion. That said, if you want to try out a one-wheel, Future Motion is the way to go. Like, if you have never ridden a one-wheel before and you're listening to this, be like, I want to build a VESC, buy a one-wheel.
Yeah.
They are wonderful devices.
Stock XR got us around for years.
Yep.
And some complaints, some broken bones, but past that, not much. Yeah.
If you can afford it, jump up to a GT. The only catch is you got to ship it to Future Motion if it breaks or something wears out for now. But especially if you're on the West Coast, don't hesitate. Buy a GT. Like,
if you can afford it.
If you can afford it.
If affording it's a hard thing.
Yeah, sure.
Buying a used XR is the best deal you will find.
Yeah.
You can get them for anywhere between $800 and $1,200 for a used XR. You're not paying sales tax on it.
Yep.
If you find one for $1,000, honestly, that is a very good deal.
Yep.
Be aware though, a lot like most things with batteries, it's the battery that's going to be the first thing to give out, and that's usually what leads people to trying to get rid of boards for pretty cheap. So just
but thankfully the XR is fixable.
Yes, exactly.
You can swap a
but
battery.
What is the most expensive part?
The battery.
The battery. So it's just something to, as you're looking at a used market, be aware that the batteries on those devices are probably
shot.
Yeah.
Maybe. I wouldn't say probably. It really depends.
Right.
A lot of people will buy a one wheel and they'll put like maybe 50 or 100 miles on it and be like, yeah, this isn't really my thing. So you end up with a great deal because it's like in mint condition.
Sure.
Any one wheel with like 500 or less miles that's a good one wheel still.
Yeah, sure.
So I think I want to touch upon one more thing before we get into the actual instructions on how to build a VESC. So if I were Future Motion, if I was a CEO, I would look at VESCs as a blessing because they take a pressure off of Future Motion. Because Future Motion makes a great product. They make the device that most people who want a one-wheeled snowboard-like device, like that's the device. Buy the Future Motion one wheel. The VESC audience, the people that want to build their own custom wheels, it's a very small slice of people that would enjoy riding one wheels. And so I don't think it's going to like steal any business away from Future Motion, but more importantly, it takes the pressure off of Future Motion to have to worry about hyper specialized machines. It's like somebody wants a really high-end like trail crusher, they can build one with a VESC. Someone wants a trick board, they can build one with the VESC. Someone wants a board that they can constantly repair and constantly break because they're crazily trying different things. Cool. You don't have to worry about Future Motion's lack of repair centers. You can build a VESC.
It covers the extreme hobbyist part of the community, and yeah, that's great. And I mean, one of the rides last week, there were 3 VESCs, 4 riders, 3 VESCs, and 1 GT. It's not like the GT didn't keep up. We were all, all the wheels made it through the ride. It's just the profiles are all different. The way they ride is all different. And the VESC kind of gives you a lot of those customizations that perhaps you're looking for.
Now, Future Motion does view VESCs as competition. They do view it as something that they don't want to exist. As any company with a monopoly would want to not have that around.
But
I agree they should. I'm on your side with that, Niko. I agree.
I'm not saying that because I like VESCs. I'm saying like if I were the CEO of Future Motion, I'd be like, thank God VESCs exist because now I can focus on making one wheels and I don't have to worry about 1% of the audience loudly complaining all the time that I'm not making the one wheel that they want.
Yeah.
Like, thank you, VESC. Thank you. Take these people away from me so I can just make one wheels and sell them to everybody else.
Because I was a little hesitant about making this video about VESCs and whatnot. We've been debating it for literally the last 2 or 3 months. And I ended up kind of eventually coming around to, yes, we should do this. Partly because of what you're saying, but also partly because it's like, is this really going to be that much of like a... This isn't going to make any dent into Future Motion's profits.
Yeah.
If anything, it's going to perhaps slightly help on that front because now all the people who will be breaking their boards and sending them in aren't going to be sending them in anymore. People like in the Jimmy Chang podcast, Kyle was saying that like a lot of people think that the repairs are an actual aspect of their business.
Oh.
And it's like, no, it's kind of like a loss. Like they take a loss more or less anytime they have to do repairs, even if it's even if they're paying for it, it's not under warranty and all that stuff. But like,
Of course.
I mean,
You do not make money fixing other people's OneWheels. Doesn't matter if you're charging people money for that. Like there's no volume to be to like make up revenue in there.
It's not like it's, you know, automobiles where there's just so many on market where,
that was where I was going with that. People think it's a profitable business venture, repairs, because it is in the automotive industry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, repairing cars is a whole industry in and of itself.
Sure.
And yeah, and so people kind of just make that assumption, even though it's not really the case. So yeah, I guess I eventually came around to it because what I don't want to do is I do not want to harm Future Motion because I want them to succeed very badly. I want them to do well. And I do not view making a VESC and making a video about how to make a VESC as being harmful to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was ultimately why I decided that we should do this.
Mm-hmm.
They might disagree with that, but I
So be it.
disagree with their disagreement.
But who knows? Maybe they agree with you.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Another thing about it is that they are very limited in what they're able to communicate because of all the liability and whatnot. Like even the word choice that they use for explaining things is very heavily legalized. Yeah. I mean, the company is essentially run by lawyers, which is a bit of a bummer. But I mean, you know, they got engineers, they got people who are very passionate about one-wheeling, but at the end of the day,
at the end of the day, there's 70 lawsuits up open, you know, or at least they did last time I checked.
Right.
Yeah. And that'll kill your company. And that's the end of OneWheels. And we don't want OneWheels to disappear.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at
And yeah. And they will if everybody goes hard against them. Like that's just the reality. They're not a huge company.
Sure.
And so for years, I have been just waiting for the day where I can just, I don't know. That has always scared me. What if they go out of business? I guess I'll have my OneWheel until it gets so broken I can't repair it anymore into the future. Well, that sucks. And no one else is going to be able to buy or make a OneWheel, build a OneWheel for whatever reason. And so I've always been looking forward to the day where Future Motion could go out of business. Not that I really want that to not happen. I'm just saying
I get what
they
you're saying.
could, and I could still continue to enjoy this thing that I love so much to my core forever.
And 2 months ago or 2.5, what occurred that that made these wonderful little VESCs possible?
Oh, I thought you were getting at my hand breaking.
Oh no,
Because that was like 2.5 months ago.
There is
yeah.
something that occurred that made this possible, which is Lee at Maker's PEV came out with a self-contained brain for a VESC. And he also has kits you can do, but that was our jumping in point.
Yeah. So basically, the VESC movement has been evolving and growing for the last 2 years. Before that, it wasn't really a thing. And I wouldn't even really say the last 2 years of it, it's like a tiny thing. And it's hard for people who are really into the space to acknowledge this because it's their whole world. They're like, everyone just doing this. And it's like, yeah, all 12 of you.
Sure, yeah. The bar to enter is pretty high, right?
Yeah.
You got to know a good amount about electrical engineering in general. Also,
Coding,
Also be wealthy enough to invest.
But we're going to lower that bar on this podcast right now.
But yeah, so like earlier this year, the firmware, which is the code that controls how the motor responds, finally got to a point where it was actually kind of like, oh, this is not bad anymore. Okay. And I was psyched on, you got guys like Mad Max on YouTube, VESC Man, Surf Dado. They're making these really cool videos about like Hannes, VESC Man. They're making cool videos about this open source OneWheel, and they're like, it's good now. It's really good. And we're like, this is it, Niko. This is time. We bought everything that you see here is completely third party with the exception of the motor. Again, we'll get to all that. But the main thing was the controller. Okay. There's what am I getting at? We jumped in, we built the VESC, we got it working, and it was all basically off camera. We were just doing this for ourselves, and it was okay.
Okay.
It was just okay.
The first weekend we went out riding, we did the dragon spine. I got on Niko's VESC, and within maybe 20 seconds, all I could think was, this is going to kill me. This is just going to kill me. It did not feel stable. That is the nice thing about the GT. It is a very finely tuned piece of machinery. It feels very solid and stable. I feel very comfortable like bombing huge hills with it. Whereas the second I got on the VESC, as cool as they are, holy crap, man. It was it
made me realize that the relationship between a rider and the board is all about trust. And the moment you don't have trust in the board, you don't want to ride. Like, I remember back in the V1 days, I had a problem with my footpad, and it would just randomly turn off. At whatever speed. And so I'd be going along at, like, say 10 miles an hour. I'm not talking about like a nosedive where you slowly lose power over the course of a second. You know, a nosedive, it's not just like a cutoff. It's like, ew, it gives out on you. It's like giving up, like the last breath, like, but a cutout where the power actually goes out is just like instantly down. And it's so sudden and jarring that it throws you. And knowing that that could happen at any time is like, I hated one-wheeling. And the VESC felt like a V1 in terms of how it rode. It was a little quirky. it had like this weird nose flutter where the nose would like kind of dip on you, and nothing is more terrifying on a one wheel than the nose dipping on you.
It did not build confidence. It did not build trust.
Especially getting on the GT, and it's like, it's rock solid. And you're like, oh, this is a premium ride.
Yeah. So like, Niko and I, we gave it a solid shot. We rode the VESCs quite a bit for like a solid like couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks there before eventually being like
settings, tuning. Like, was like, oh, you just tweak it. We're like tweaking all over the place.
Oh yeah, we tried so many different settings. We tried other people's tune cards, all their settings and all this stuff. And it was just like, at the end of the day, I couldn't get a board that felt good to ride, and so I didn't want to ride it. And I would go back to the GT because I loved the GT. And then the second change that happened was about like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe by the time this podcast comes out. A new firmware update came out for the VESC, and it changed everything.
Yep. I think, Mitch, I can't remember his last
name. Yeah, I don't know. I met him at Foot Life
L.
Fest. Cool guy. He's the guy who helped me change the settings to get it to stand vertically. He figured out that basically he was able to apply a filter to just one axis of the rotation, whereas before they were applying it to all 3 axes, and it was just making the board feel too laggy and stuff like that.
Laggy, elastic kind of dips. And that was causing the nose to do all its weird stuff. Yeah, and once it's like, wait, what if we just filter one axis, the one that bumps up and down that you actually want to filter, and we don't touch the others? And suddenly it's like, my board is perfect now.
It went from being like, this board is jankier than a V1 to being like, is this the best one wheel?
What made it that way? What was the winning ticket?
It was the confidence in the board. You know, it went from my board was Tobey Maguire, and then now it's Tobey Maguire if he got bit by a spider.
Radioactive.
I don't know why I said Toby and not like Peter Parker.
Spider, but
not normal spider. Well, I'll put it this way. When you're riding a GT and you go over a bump, the board stays perfectly flat. It is literally like you are standing on a floor, and you can feel everything moving under you, and you can feel the bumps and stuff, but the board is just rock solid. It is so tuned in to the motor and electricity that the moment something's going to tilt the board a little bit, no, it fixes it. And you're riding a rock solid flat board. And when you like start going faster and faster, you're like 15, 16, 17 miles an hour, and you're hitting bumps, and the board doesn't even care, and it's just rock solid and flat, you feel like you can go 20 miles an hour safely. And in fact, like the first time riding the GT, I still had my broken collarbone. I hit 19.5 miles an hour on the board.
With your broken collarbone?
Yeah. Remember we were driving up to see Adam Savage?
Yeah.
And we were doing that one like little ride around on that one smooth street.
You didn't have
I was like 3 weeks out from my collarbone healing or being broken. Yeah, it was right at the top of summer. Yep.
Okay.
And we were on the smooth street. I was like, I can just go 20 miles an hour. Like because you feel that when you push on the board, you feel that it has more to give, and it's rock solid. It doesn't dip. It doesn't sag. And the VESCs were, and now they don't. Now they have that rock solid feeling that the GT has. And you're like, I can go 20 miles an hour, and you hit a bump, and the board doesn't care. It stays perfectly flat.
There's still it still has some weird quirks to it. We have been continuing to mess with the settings. I think I've finally arrived on a few settings that I think like make it feel good now. But every now and then there's still like, it depends on like the right frequency of bumps you hit to confuse the filters and whatnot. And then my nose will start dipping and it takes a moment for the nose to come back up. That's weird, but
it's for the most part it's there. Like, Wren, would you say the VESC rides better or worse than the GT? Let me guess. You're going to say better in some ways and worse in others.
Well, of course, yes. I think I'll say at the end of the day, the GT still rides better. It still feels a little bit more premium. The VESC feels a little bit more raw. But
it can perform.
Yep. And there's another thing to it as well, which I've talked with a bunch of guys who are into the VESC stuff, you know, Niko Allman, Josh Haley, a few other guys from Footlife Fest. And, you know, it's really cool to be able to kind of discuss these things and try to figure out what exactly is in the secret sauce of Future Motion's like riding profile, because it's pretty advanced. All of this, like most people don't realize that when the board turns, it actually accelerates a little bit. And that's just because if you don't, the nose hits the ground. And so it has to actually accelerate a little bit to lift that nose anytime you turn. And that's been the case since the V1. And a VESC, you know, I think in the earlier days, they didn't really quite have that tuned in. So like it was a problem. And now it's a full on slider. You can make it really extreme. So I can do these freaking like 1080s just by standing in one spot, by just getting really up on the side of the tire and just start trying to go. And it just spins in place essentially. I don't know where I was going with that.
Just, you know, tell us about how cool it is. Well, here, I think this is a perfect time for us to be like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, the tutorial is going to begin now. And we're going to open this tutorial with some thanks. I want to thank Surf Dado for all the work he's done. I want to thank Wee for all the work he's done as well. Mitch for making OneWheels great.
Not OneWheels.
Sorry, for making VESCs ride really smoothly. Mad Max for all the work he's done with making YouTube videos and kind of introducing people to this.
Whoop whoop, nice guy.
Whoop whoop,
nice guy.
Because I mean, like
Hannes
is making cool videos, but Max was the dude actually like, I don't know, making the types of videos that got casual one-wheel riders like hyped. He got me hyped, and that was kind of like, he was the guy who literally pushed both of us over the edge to jump into this.
Yep. And also a quick little shout out to Float Wheel, Flow Glider, Chai Battery. Like they're making the pieces that we need to make this. Fungineers. Yep.
And we'll get into all components here in a moment.
Not Float Wheel. I don't know. That's the wrong name. Yeah. I mean, sure. Thank him, whatever. But I misspoke.
There's so many different like one wheel companies out there now. Like I'm wearing a shirt from the Float Gang based out of Florida. I mean, it's a bunch of crews, you know, it's like they'll make podcasts, Float Gang, you know, they'll make t-shirts, and when they start getting bigger, they actually start making big accessories. The biggest company I think would probably be either the Float Life or Craft and Ride.
Yeah, sure.
And they make like literally their entire business is piggybacking off of this one device from a company.
And making great products. I mean, honestly, the bang for your buck is incredible through all.
I adore Craft and Ride. Nick and Mike, those guys are super awesome. They're the kind of guys you want to run a company, and they care about customer service. They make great products, and they also distribute a lot of other accessories that other people make. And so it's kind of like craftandride.com. I think it's kind of like a one-stop shop for pretty much any one-wheel accessory.
Okay, VESC tutorial.
Right, I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so point being,
what is a one-wheel like device made out of, Wren?
Okay, so a one-wheel device, if you were to try to simplify this down to the most simple components, you have a motor, a brain, and a power source, and some sort of vessel that holds all of it together. And so a one-wheel is
skeleton.
Yeah, and so like, you have the motor and tire, you have the front foot pad and the back foot pad, which has a volume inside of it that you can put other things in. If we're parting out a board, the main, I guess, architecture revolves around the rails, and we are using these rails from the Fungineers, fungineers.com, I think might be their website. I think they might be mostly on Facebook. This is their first rail setup, I believe. But Float Life has been making rails for a long time, a bunch of varieties of those. Tires, a bunch of different options for tires, as well as foot pads and even bumpers. Like 4 different companies are making bumpers now.
Yep.
And the bumpers are the element that's on the bottom that prevents your brain and your battery from being damaged.
These are a special edition Corridor Digital bumpers from the Float Life.
Which I believe now are just up as regular bumpers.
I mean, probably, yeah.
Just black and yellow bumpers. Yep. Yeah. So if you're going to build a VESC, you need a motor and a tire. You're going to need a brain and some sort of compartment to hold the brain. You're going to need a battery and some sort of compartment to hold the battery. You're going to need rails, which are the two metal pieces on the side of the OneWheel / VESC that hold this all together. You're going to need footpads so you can stand on the board. And in particular, the front footpad needs a sensor to turn the board on and off.
And that's if you want to model it after a OneWheel. The great thing about VESC is suddenly
you can model
those constraints
anything.
go away.
Yeah,
Sure.
but let's just assume we're going to do it the way we did it.
Yeah.
Also, you're going to need a charger for the battery. Don't forget, when you get a battery, you also need to have a charger for it.
Sure.
Okay, so step one, what do you
Got a hole
do?
in the box.
Buy a used XR. Step one.
Yeah.
If you're trying to start out and building a VESC, your very first ever VESC.
And is that any
No.
used XR?
If you're starting
or-
out, just get into one-wheeling.
Yeah, get into
Yeah, sure.
one-wheeling. Start with one wheels.
So I guess
And
this
once
is
your XR is broken,
And does it have to be a specific XR?
Any
I
XR.
know. Okay.
any
any
like people are
XR.
doing it with Pines. People are doing it with like V1s and pluses.
you
like,
don't need any one wheel. You don't need any one wheel or future motion parts also. But we're just going to approach this from a simple, approachable direction right
So
now.
the vast majority of people who would be interested in getting into VESC, there's probably two groups. One, you live overseas and getting one wheels are kind of difficult for you, and especially the concept of having it repaired and shipping it across the ocean, that sucks. And I can totally see that being an interest for you to get into one wheeling by just jumping into the deep end by building a VESC. I wouldn't recommend it, but I get it. Secondly, it's going to be people who already have a one wheel that maybe have broken it or they want to try this out and whatnot. All of that. There's various reasons. Maybe they want a different battery. Maybe they don't want the BMS, the battery management system, which is a whole computer chip inside of the battery compartment that is fragile, to put it one way.
And it often breaks. After a certain amount of miles, your BMS will probably burn out. Yeah.
So if you have an XR, used, broken, doesn't matter. You effectively have all the parts you need to make a VESC outside of a brain and arguably a battery. You could use the stock battery, but if you're going to make a VESC,
let's be real. Most people are going to use the stock battery because there aren't any other options right now.
there are a couple. We'll get to
Ish.
that. When we get to the battery segment, we'll talk about that. So starting out, let's talk about the non-electronic components. You're going to need a set of rails. I recommend you check out the rails from Float Life or the rails from Fungineers, the Thunder rails. Start with those. Or if you have a used XR, you can just simply use the rails from your XR. Get whatever you'd like, but check out those resources
You
first.
could probably also go on Facebook Marketplace and just search one wheel parts. Some people will literally have their one wheel and they will break it down into their components and sell those components individually because there's a whole marketplace for the controller of a one wheel, for the BMS of a one wheel, because you can't buy them on their own. In order for you to get your hands on one, someone else had to disassemble a one wheel.
Yep.
Sure.
It's like heart transplants, it's like you can't just buy a heart. Someone has to die.
So continuing down this line of the non-electronics part of this, so you have your rails. You're going to need compartments to store your brain and your battery. So we'll get to the brain in a second. The compartment's kind of built into that. But the battery, once again, you can use the battery compartment from an XR. You could also 3D print one, or you can buy the Torque Box, which is from, I think it's Badger Wheel. I don't know if they have a different company name, but the Torque Box
Badger wheel. Yeah.
is a specific battery compartment that fits in a XR style frame, and it's a little extra big, so you can fit a little bit of an extra big battery inside of it. You will, however, need a specific bumper that fits the Torque Box because it's bigger than an XR battery compartment. You can use an XR's battery compartment as well if you want, especially if you're using a stock battery.
Sure, but if you're going to use like a chai, again, all these modifications are probably going to require you to bust out a Dremel.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that in the battery section.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's going to be a whole chapter. That's
Yeah.
definitely like the biggest challenge of this.
But so far in our non-electronic pieces, we've got rails. We have the compartment that holds the battery, and that could be the one that comes with an XR, or it can be the Torque Box, or it can be a 3D printed thing. Now we need to talk about bumpers. You can get these amazing bumpers from the Float Life, or if you have the Torque Box, like I was talking about, the thing that holds the battery, you'll need a special bumper for that.
And I think that I can't remember the name of that type of bumper. Is it the?
It's like the torque bumper or something like that.
It's isn't it made by Badger Wheel?
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
made in association at the very least.
Okay.
Yeah. So final little bit here is the foot pads, and that kind of transitions us to electronics. Rear foot pad, I recommend the Cush pad. It's lovely.
The Cush Wide is my favorite.
You can get it from Craft and Ride. Nothing electronic about it. It's just rubber.
Yeah.
And the front foot pad, however, needs to have a sensor in it. So you can buy foot pads that have the sensor. I don't actually know where. I have any recommendations, but we'll probably have it in the description below. However, you can just go on Future Motion, onewheel.com, and you can buy their foot pads.
Sure.
Now, frustratingly though, you can't buy just the front foot pad.
Yes, you're gonna get the back foot pad.
You're
too.
gonna get a set.
And
Sure.
I'm not even sure you can still buy XR foot pads.
Oh, that's right.
I don't know if you can because they discontinued the XR.
Wow.
You could for a while. I have a feeling it's still up. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
Either
because
way.
I saw they still had V1, some V1 parts on
Yeah.
their,
Oh, well
their
then, okay.
store. So yeah.
I'd be surprised if, I mean, I don't know.
But that's what I'm doing. I'm running an XR foot pad on the front of my wheel.
Same.
Yep. So okay. So we basically got your non-mechanical, your non-electronic things out of the way. And by the way, we just constructed like half of our OneWheel. Or sorry, our VESC. I told you it'd be confusing.
Look at how easy that was.
Look how easy
We're
that was.
halfway there.
We're halfway there. Okay. Let's get into the first important thing. The brain. Here's what everybody should do. Head on over to makerspev.com,
.com, I believe.
I believe.
.com, I believe.
Now, if you're lucky, Wee has his fully assembled units for sale at the time that you hear this podcast. Realistically, he won't. Realistically, he'll be sold out because they are amazing. And he's just like, it's like two dudes making them.
Sure.
But hey, welcome to the world of open source DIY, right? Hop onto the Facebook OneWheel group, the OneWheel VESC Builders group.
Or pv.dev.
Yep,
PevDev.
the forum, PevDev. And if they aren't available, ask if they'll be available or wait or check the site in a few weeks. He's actively working on them. Like they're coming out, he's shipping them all the time. So,
but it's like literally just 2 or 3 guys.
Yeah, they're just dudes. So like you want one, just go talk to them. If they're not available, just be patient. In a few weeks, it'll pop up,
So what he's making though, so the VESC is literally a computer chip.
Yep.
It's just a big
It's like an
populated silicon board with a bunch of like capacitors, MOSFETs, inductors, all that stuff that controls a motor. That's what the VESC is, but you can't just like take that and like tape it to your OneWheel and expect it to work. So what has had to come out around that is an entire enclosure for it, and an enclosure that has all the correct dimensions to fit OneWheel rails, the XR OneWheel rails.
And specifically like the screw points and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And so what's inside of that is essentially just that VESC, the chip with a big heat sink and stuff like that, various plugs and stuff for the charger, the power button here.
Yep, there's a power button on one side.
Which is red. Look at that.
It's pretty sick. Pretty sick.
Yeah, and so I guess the angle that Maker's PEV has taken is by taking like the flow glider kit essentially and combining it with their own design for the actual 3D printed enclosure. They did tons of testing to figure out what won't break, what is watertight enough, various types of plastic, ABS, PETG, PLA, etc., all those things. And I think they've settled on a design that will continue to work going forward.
Yep.
And the big thing about the kit, though, is that the plugs and connectors are all compatible with regular OneWheel XRs.
Yep.
That's the big thing. So the battery plug is the same. You can use your regular battery, plug it in. The OneWheel motor has a weird freaking automotive type plug on it. You can plug it into the VESC.
Yep. You basically can swap the brain and you're almost good to go. Like if you have an XR, you take out the Future Motion brain and you put in your VESC brain from Maker's PEV, and you plug everything in and you're basically good to go. Like it's that simple almost.
So let's say you have a OneWheel XR and your board broke somehow and you have to send it in to get repaired. Whether the BMS was broken or the controller was broken, that could be upwards of $500 or $600 to fix.
Easy, sure.
Assuming it's out of warranty. If it's under warranty and you're not,
if it's an XR, it's probably not in warranty anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It depends. Point being, that's several $100s worth of repairs just to get it back to where you were. Or you can spend, I think they're like $700 for
the fully self-assembled box.
For the
flow glider
VESC.
box.
Okay,
yeah, for
cool.
the VESC.
Which is that's not cheap. I understand that. It's certainly not cheap, but it opens up a lot of doors and a lot of possibilities. And another thing is that the VESC actually does unlock more power from the motor.
Yep. So remember at the beginning of this conversation, I was talking about torque. And now torque, especially at low end, comes from current. And Future Motion's brain has a smaller pipe than the VESC. The pipe on the VESC is much, much bigger to the point where you can basically pull all the amps that your battery can give and it's more about how many amps can the motor handle. And the VESC is like, I'll give the motor as much amps as it wants. And the motor's like, I can't handle anymore.
So you're kind of like sacrificing a little bit of range and
also durability, because that's another name of the game for Future Motion, because they are selling devices that need to last for years and thousands of miles. And so they artificially limit the power going to the motor, like the braking current, the actual like current that goes to it is limited. I don't know what the actual amperage is, maybe 30 or 35 amps. I'm not exactly sure. It doesn't matter. Point being is that it doesn't matter. They are limiting it in a way that you can't throw too much power into the device that will cause the components to eventually wear out faster.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's not a problem with the VESC. Okay, so let's say
it technically is a problem. That's what I'm getting at. It is technically
a problem. Just be easy on your equipment.
Yeah.
So let's say you go to Maker's PEV and you go to buy that flow glider box and it's just not there, right? This fully self-assembled kit, it's just not available. You really want to jump in. Well, guess what? It's actually still really easy to jump in, Jan.
Hit me. Hit me.
So they have a full kit that they sell at Maker's PEV. It's all the parts for the VESC, including the VESC, the wires, the connectors. You specifically want the non-heatsink version, because then you're going to head over to flowglider.com. You're going to get the lid for the box. And you're going to get the lid that has the mount for the VESC, because that metal lid on the box is going to act as your heatsink.
Okay.
And there is a tutorial video that shows how to take all the pieces from Maker's PEV, and you're going to 3D print the box, or you can buy one. I recommend checking out Lit Timber for 3D printed boxes. You're going to get specifically the lid mount box, and you're going to get specifically the lid mount lid from Flow Glider. So once again, it's the kit from Maker's PEV, the non-heatsink VESC kit, full DIY kit, comes with all the cables. You're going to get the box for the brain from Lit Timber, or print it yourself. Or there's other people that offer to. You can easily hop onto the Facebook group and ask.
Sure.
But Lit Timber has like carbon fiber prints. They got everything. And then you're going to get the lid mount lid from Flow Glider. You're going to assemble it yourself. It takes like 15 minutes. It's not that hard. You plug in a couple cables, you put a couple things in the spots, and you're done. There's like maybe
it's going to take longer than 15
There's
minutes.
actually a video of it. It's very straightforward now. With the lid mount, it's actually very, very straightforward. It's literally about as simple as plugging a GPU and some RAM and like connecting your power supply to like PC parts. If you've ever opened up a PC and like swapped the GPU, you can build a brain for your OneWheel. So it's very
for sure. You're
straightforward.
still probably assuming a lot. The second time through, it'll be 15 minutes.
It's important to know.
Yeah.
If you are at all hesitant around electronics, this is not the project for you.
Yes, or it is, and you're going to get less hesitant as you go.
I mean,
There's a bunch of people that are very helpful. But once again, you watch this video of building a VESC brain in the Flow Glider box. It's very straightforward. It is like an intermediate Lego build. Like it's not that complicated. Just follow the instructions.
Have you ever built a Death Star? You can build a VESC. You can build a VESC.
So you got your 3D printed box. You got your electronics inside of it. You got your lid on top. And now you have your self-enclosed brain ready to go. That's really all there is to it. Maker's PEV, Flow Glider for the lids, and either print your own box, find somebody that can print it for you, or buy one from like Lit Timber or something like that.
there's another option
There's another option.
from Fungineers.
Oh, really?
So we have this. If you buy a set of rails, or if you buy their Superflux motor, actually, I don't know about that one. Don't quote me on that. But at the very least, if you bought their Thunder rails, which we have here, it comes with the metal lid for both the front and the back compartment enclosure, and files, STL files that you can 3D print for the controller or the battery box.
Yeah, which happens to be literally what you're buying if you go to Lit Timber. You're buying a 3D printed version of that STL file.
Yeah. And you can also you can take the STL file. There are tons of services out there that will print it for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So lots of ways to get your box printed. But at the end of the day, you're going to get your metal lid mount style for the VESC from Flow Glider, and you're going to get the kit from Maker's PEV. Or if you're lucky / willing to drop a little extra money, get the fully self-assembled kit from Maker's PEV if it's available. Boom, your brain's taken care of. Next step.
There is, I mean, the Future Motion battery, one of the anti-modification things they've tried doing is literally just taking the plug and putting it on backwards.
All right.
And that kind of sucks. If you know about it, it's not a problem. So it's not really a very effective thing in my mind. They're just creating problems where people accidentally destroy stuff.
But the Future Motion battery is the negative is positive and the positive is negative.
Yeah. And so the Maker's PEV controller doesn't have it reversed, Wee told me that he refused to put in a reversed plug
Good for him.
built into it. He's like, no, I can't. Yeah, and so if you want to use your stock battery with the Maker's PEV kit, he's got a little plug converter that basically just reverses it, and you plug it in.
Yep. Okay. So you got your brain, and like I said, there's a bunch of instructions for the details. Like you plug this here, you plug this here, you put this here, you attach this here. Once again, it's very straightforward. You watch the video of the guy assembling it, and you're like, oh, this is very straightforward. But you got your brain, and you know what? You slip it on those rails, screw it in, boom, you're done, right?
Okay.
For the brain. Now we have to deal with the battery, and then we have to deal with connecting everything, right? So next step is the battery. Things get a little more complicated here.
A
lot more. All right. Wren and I were lucky enough to get CBSCO batteries from Chai Battery Systems before they discontinued them. And here's
CBCSO.
CBCSO. And Chai Battery, if you're listening, please, we need another battery that has a self-contained BMS. It doesn't have to be 84 volts. It could be 80 volts. It could be 76 volts. It doesn't matter. But please, DIY
there's a lot of context that supports that
needs another battery with a built-in BMS.
So,
Chai, listen to us. Listen, heed our words.
So there haven't been many options for one-wheel batteries if your battery dies. You have to send it in, they'll put a new one, and then you can carry on your way. Then this company based out of Chicago called Chai Battery Systems sprung up making replacement batteries that you can just swap out if you know how to like take out screws. It wasn't actually that hard. And they're like, but there is a little bit more space in here. What if we took out the little spacers between the batteries and packed in double the batteries? And that was where my favorite battery came out, which is called the CBXR. It was a battery that was meant for the OneWheel XR, and it essentially went twice as far. I was easily able to get like over 20 miles of range on a CBXR, even though they would advertise like 25 to 30 miles. I was like, no.
Not the pace that we ride.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And so they've got replacement batteries for the Pint, for the Plus, for the XR. And earlier this year, they came out with a new battery that's specifically meant for VESC conversion kits. And it was specifically designed to fit within the enclosure for the OneWheel XR, and it was a 20-cell battery compared to the XR, which was a 15-cell battery. What does that mean? It means you have 15 individual little lithium-ion cells in series to add up to a certain voltage, and the batteries we have are 20 cells, so there's an additional 5 cells in series to increase that voltage. Also, there's like 2 series in parallel. It doesn't matter. Point being, it's a more powerful battery, and it's incompatible with any one wheel. Again, this is not a one wheel. And so we thought, this is it. This is what we've been wanting. We want, because the stock battery pack on a VESC was already outperforming a GT, and a GT has higher voltage. Mad Max showed that in his videos. And so we're like, oh man, bigger battery pack. We got it. It was really cool. 84 volts is amazing.
Which is the maximum the VESC can take, by the way, is 84 volts.
And promptly couldn't fit it in the battery enclosure. It could not fit. And they're like, yeah, no, you just got to like cut away some of the plastic material. Bruh, we spent an entire day basically just dremeling out the inside of the battery enclosure. We're just like full on like, all right, all these little plastic bits, they're gone. And we're shaving it down, like hardcore shaving it down.
Even the CBXR.
CBXR was a hard fit too.
Yeah.
But this is significantly harder.
Wow.
Yeah.
And to the point where like you get it all in there, it packs in, you put the metal lid on, and there's like a 4 or 5 millimeter gap between the bottom of the enclosure and the metal lid that sits on top of it. And so you have to like take clamps to clamp it down just so you can get the screw in far enough to catch. And then you can screw that corner and then you go to the other side, put that corner in and go around the perimeter and then slowly just tighten them all down until the metal plate literally folds down around it.
Nothing gets squeezed out of place.
And so that has been problematic, you know, you put that much pressure on the batteries. The battery cells themselves are actually pretty dang strong, but the connections between the batteries are not. And so the CBCSO has these little, I call them bunny ears. It's literally 4 extra cells, two pairs of 2 cells that stick out and then out like that. And they sit up and they sit flush at the end of the rails. You see how there's like this little like angle here, there's a gap here, and they put those cells there, but they just barely fit. They just and saying that they just barely fit also feels a little like it's a generous term. It was significant effort for us to get those batteries in.
It took about 4 hours, 5 hours for us to get the batteries in.
But we did get them in.
Yes, we did.
And the board did work after that. And it continues to work.
Yes. Now, it's worth mentioning, another beautiful thing about the CBCSO is it has a built-in battery management system. So what is a BMS? What is a battery management system? Well, as Wren pointed out here, you don't have one battery. A battery is actually like 20 batteries in our cases.
40, technically.
40. So what happens when one battery in one individual cell is a little bit imbalanced versus the other cells and it's charged at a different rate? Well, you don't really have any way to address that problem unless you have a battery management system.
Sure.
Or, for example, what happens if the thing overheats? What happens if the current draw is going too fast and you need to like cut it off? What happens if it gets too low? So there's all these things you have around just the raw batteries to protect them, to modulate them, to let you charge them safely, to let you discharge them safely. And that's all involved in your battery management system. It is possible to put a battery in your VESC without a BMS and just write it. It is completely possible, but at some point you're going to have to balance the cells in that battery. So having a BMS is great. Now, if you're to use a stock battery, you can also use the stock Future Motion battery management system, and you can still use that with your VESC. There's instructions online. Figure out how you do that. You basically just have to connect a certain wire or solder a certain wire, and then you can read the info. And if it's one of the newer models, you technically need to add a little chip in line there. Once again, it sounds complicated. It's really not. It's just taking one wire, soldering it to the chip, taking another wire, soldering it to the chip.
I've done it.
Yeah.
I did
it's
it
very
on one of my
doable.
old BMSs.
Yeah.
Because Future Motion's newer XRs 2 years ago started coming out with BMSs that were tied to the controller. This is part of what makes it very frustrating for people like me because of the whole, people talk about the right to repair stuff with Future Motion is because they pull stuff like that, where it's like, my battery's dead, but I can't change it out because the battery management system, which is there to protect the battery, will literally make it incompatible with any other controller except the one that came with it from the factory. And so people eventually figured out how to bypass the checks that they put in place. And so you solder in this chip and whatever.
Yep. That's how you do it. That's if you want to use the Future Motion battery. But long story short, having a battery with a built-in BMS is a godsend and it's a great way to go. Unfortunately, the CBCSO is not available. However, IndySpeedControl.com, they make a VESC battery.
Ooh.
It's a 20-cell battery. 84 volts, has a BMS built into it.
And it does not fit the stock
It does not
enclosure.
fit the stock enclosure. You know what? That's fine. Because frankly, neither did the CBCSO. The one from Indy Speed Control, or Indy Speed, was it? Indy Speed. Indy Speed Control. Theirs fits the torque box.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just another quick shout out to Chai Battery Systems. So
Yes.
I love this company, for the record.
They have the torque pack, but it's sold out. Hopefully it comes back in stock.
So the CBXR, I think, God, so many friggin' acronyms. They also have what's called the board bank, which is essentially just a battery pack and a little enclosure with a wire sticking out of it. So when your one wheel gets slow and you're not near a wall outlet, you take this out of your backpack, plug it in. It's incredible. I miss using it. I love it, but I don't ride XRs anymore, so I can't use it. And you cannot use one on a GT either because of the proprietary plug that they use has a special little computer chip inside the plug that communicates with a special signal to the controller. And if you're not getting that exact signal, you can't charge the board on a GT. Okay. So Chai Battery Systems, they make these batteries, and I think they've always been pretty good quality, but the CBCSO came out and people started having quality control issues to the point that Chai Batteries, they delisted the product from their page. Like you cannot buy one right now. It's not that it's sold out. They literally discontinued it.
Yeah. But once again, Chai, I know Suron electric dirt bikes are sick, and it is awesome that you guys are making batteries for them. Please, us VESC boys, we need a battery solution for our one wheels. Granted, there's other options. You can ask people on Facebook to build a battery for you. There's this IndySpeedControl.com guy that, I just called up here. Who knows if their batteries are cool? I hope they are, because I'm talking about them here on the podcast. But at the end of the day, Chai Battery Systems has been our go-to for years. I definitely trust them. I think trying to pack 84 volts, 20 cells into a one wheel, a standard like XR enclosure is just too much.
Yeah.
Dropping it down to 19 or 18 cells.
I think
something like
18 would be the sweet spot because that would allow you to get rid of those bunny ears.
Yep.
And 18S is the same voltage as the GT.
Yep. And then they also they have the torque box from Badger Wheel, and theoretically Chai Battery Systems makes a battery specifically for the torque box. It is sold out right now. I don't know if it's coming back, but once again, Chai, even if it's just for the torque box and you're just working together, you work with somebody else, please, please, please help us find a solution for VESC batteries. But in the meantime, do not be discouraged if you're trying to build a VESC. Check out these other services. Go to the Facebook group. You can find options, they're out there. At the end of the day, though, you really want to try to find a battery with a built-in BMS. You're going to need a cable to run from that battery to your controller on the other end of your VESC.
I don't know. I consider stuff like cables and connectors and all that stuff to be trivial.
Well, there's on this one cable.
One of them isn't communicating properly.
I mean, trivial in the sense that you can get them.
Yes. Sure. Well, Maker's PEV has the one cable you're looking for. It is a battery cable. That's all you need. Turns out you only need one cable. It's the cable that goes from the battery to the controller because the motor comes with its own cable.
Sure,
so that's it. Turns out I only need to talk about one cable. Maker's PEV offers it. But yes, so we've talked about the brain. You can build the brain. We talked about the battery. I've thrown out an option where you can buy a battery. You can use a stock battery from an XR. You could probably even use a CBXR. You're going to need to find a battery management system. But there are solutions out there.
Also, you do not have to have a BMS in your board. It is there to protect you. You are running a risk without it, but we talk about the cells balancing. Good batteries, they don't just go out of balance. It's one of those things, batteries start going out of balance when you do a lot of repeated charges. So a full cycle is when they start off at full battery and they drain down to 0 and then they come back up. This is never a problem on our phones and laptops because there's only one cell. It's just one battery cell and that's it. But when you have a lot of cells working together, when they have different internal resistances, and so their charge rate is inherently going to be slightly different. And so charging up to full and then discharging back down, each cell's rate of discharge and charging is going to be slightly different so that it's not a matter of time, it's a matter of cycles. 100 cycles to 300 cycles, which is a lot of charges, they'll start being really out of balance. And the point of a battery management system is that it charges it up to full, and then it slowly discharges each of the cells down until they all match up, and then it charges everything back up to full again. That is a very important thing, and that's been a problem on OneWheel XRs in the past. Oh, my board is dying at 20 or 30%. It's because one of the cells is weaker, and when that one hits the bottom, it doesn't matter what the charge of all the other battery cells are, your board is dead.
Yeah,
done. Out of battery.
So every battery cell, 4.2 volts on a cell is full, and 3.2 volts is basically empty.
Sure.
Getting down below 3.2 volts into 3.1, 3.0 volts per cell, and they start to dip pretty quick as you get down there, you can start to damage the battery.
Yeah.
So that's why you have an empty point on batteries, because that's the point where you're not damaging the battery yet. So as you are using your board and you are looking at your battery, because you're going to have raw control over everything, you want to make sure you're looking at your battery cells and making sure they're not dipping below 3.2 volts as you ride.
Yeah. Now, again, the controller can do that for you instead of a battery management system. It's just not doing it on an individual cell basis. That would only protect you from overcharging and over discharging. So if you add up the voltage of all of the cells, that's the total voltage of the battery pack. And the controller sees that voltage. And so once it gets down to 3.2 times 15 or times 20 or however many cells you have in your pack, once it hits that mark, the controller's like, okay, your battery is now at 0%. We're going to safely and slowly encourage you to get off the board by slowly changing the default angle to be tail down, as opposed to just completely shutting off on you.
Sure.
And that protects the battery.
So an easy way to measure your battery, if you don't have access to anything or you just have the basic voltage, is you take the number of cells. Let's say in this case, Wren and I have batteries with 20 cells in them. Well, 20 cells times 4.2, because 4.2 volts for each cell at full, equals 84 volts.
There you go.
So when your board's at 84, you're basically full. So how about 3.2? Well, 3.2 volts per cell times 20 is 64 volts. So as we're riding along, I can look at my phone, and granted, it's not perfect because voltage does change depending on how much you're pulling from the battery.
Yeah.
Sure.
But if I'm sitting at 74 volts, I'm about halfway gone with my battery.
Sure.
Not exact, but close enough, right? So that's how you generally use voltage to measure your capacity. And when you're doing a DIY project like this, you're probably going to be using voltage to measure your capacity.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's if you're going to get into this, reading voltages is something you're going to have to learn.
Yeah.
Like understanding, oh, okay, at this voltage, I'm at around 70% battery. Oh, at this voltage, I'm like around 30% battery. There are gauges that kind of show you, but
and some guides online I've used in the past when I had a CBXR XR. Yeah.
Yep. So you got to source a battery solution, and it needs to have a BMS. Hopefully Chai hears our pleas. But in the meantime, there's other options, other solutions. Once again, head over to pev.dev or the Facebook VESC Builders Group, OneWheel VESC Builders Group, and ask for solutions there if you can't find any.
I think most people watching this, if they're going to be getting into it, will be using their stock XR battery pack, and that's totally fine.
Yep, 100% totally fine.
Yeah.
You're going to get amazing torque out of it.
We were riding the other night with Brendan Floaty, as he's called, Floaty McFly. He won Race to the Rail in 2020. He's been a friend of mine for years.
World champion one-wheel racer.
Also, just a stand-up guy. Just a stand-up guy.
Chill dude, yeah. And yeah, so he was on his VESC and keeping up with us on a stock XR battery pack.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now, granted, he runs out of battery much faster than we do, but he's hitting the same drops. He's hitting the same climbs. Yeah.
And having no trouble leading the pack. Yeah, no trouble.
So leading the pack sometimes.
So all of you out there with XRs who are thinking about vesting them, you will see a performance increase even with the same battery you already have.
You know, we haven't mentioned the one downside or the draw. There's a drawback here that is pretty considerable to me. Where did your lights go?
Oh my God, you're right.
I was out there on those buttery trails and, ton of light coming off of my board, but then I would look back at just darkness, headlamps and flashlights looking like a bunch of villains.
This is where I, again, remind everyone that this is so early days for the open source, like OneWheel movement. It's been 2 years. All of the really exciting stuff has been this year, but even then it's like, there's only a small handful of people. Like I literally met the dude who designed the board for the VESC and the guy who wrote the code for the VESC at Float Life Fest this year. It's like 2 people. Granted, there are a bunch of a small handful of other people contributing to the project, primarily Surf Dado. And yeah, it's not many people working on this. And so they haven't been able to get around to the lights yet. So the
small thing, right? Yeah.
If you want to have lights, you have to buy an extra component that can talk to the board and power it and all that stuff. And then you get the LEDs in there. And so if you look carefully, I don't know if you can see this on we're about right here. So there is a little panel where the lights go, about right here. There are no lights here. That's just a plastic wall.
Yep. So needless to say, at this point in the tutorial, we've talked about building the brain and where you can go to build the brain and the things you can use to watch and how to do it. We've talked about the battery, ways you can source a battery. Remember, you're using your stock battery. The positive and negative wires are flipped. The red wire is the negative, the black wire is the positive on the future motion battery. So when you plug that into your VESC brain, you'll need to have a little adapter that's going to flip it over again.
And there's nothing preventing you from just plugging it in and killing your VESC.
Actually, I'm pretty sure the VESCs won't die.
Really?
Sure
okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have a pretty solid built-in current protection now, the VESCs.
But regardless, it's super dangerous. If you're to
still not
reverse the
something you
polarity on a plug for a battery and plug it into anything, it would instantly fry whatever it is you plug it into and potentially short circuit your own battery and cause it to explode.
Fire. Yeah,
sure.
So don't do that. Just remember, if you're using a stock battery, it's flipped. Just follow instructions, read everything twice. Okay, so now you have your battery and you have your brain. Simple enough. It's in a box, whether it's the torque pack or you're using a standard XR box. Screw it to your rails. All right, you got your rails, you got your battery on the back, you got your brain on the front. Grab your motor. Okay, where do you get a motor from? As of this point, there's only 2 options. Either an XR motor, the Hypercore, which there's a lot of Hypercore motors floating
There's
around.
a lot.
You can probably
you can source one without too much effort.
Yep.
It's not going to be cheap. I mean, you're probably looking at like $300 or more for a motor.
Yep.
Probably 4 or 5.
Yeah, actually probably more like 4 or 5. But you can get a Superflex motor from Fungineers, the same people that make the Thunder Rails, for about $350, maybe.
Well, that was how much we got it for in the first batch.
I looked at the price on the side. I think it's still sub.
It's going to stay that price?
I don't know, but it's still sub $400 as of now. Either way, that is a motor that's technically more powerful and faster than the Hypercore motor. That said, the Hypercore motor is exceptional.
It's great.
Wonderful motor. Sure. Yep. So you are going to be fine with the Hypercore motor.
Until whatever they did to the GT. The motor on the GT is, in my opinion, a downgrade from the XR. Everything else about the GT is incredible, but the motor, which is weird because the motor is kind of technically the same motor as the XR. The stator is the same, but the hub, which is the thing that actually spins and has the tire on it, basically has a lining of magnets surrounding it. And those magnets interact with the copper coils of the stator. You know, you have like the electricity going into the stator that creates these electrical currents that create magnetism that pushes on the magnets of the hub in a very, very precise synchronized way that causes it to spin. Now, those magnets are like maybe 3 or 4 Newton meters more powerful on the GT than the XR, but they're also not held in as well. And as a result of that, don't quote me on that, the heat transfer of the heat generated in those magnets isn't able to get out as well. And so you end up with a lot of efficiency losses on the GT motor, on top of the whole, in my opinion, a debacle between the axle block and the rail.
There's a heat issue.
There's a heating issue for sure.
On the GT. The GT is not able to get rid of heat and it overheats.
It's very frustrating for me.
We had an interesting situation on top of a mountain where Wren's board was almost boiling. It was almost 200 degrees.
Yeah.
And it was making this weird sound. And we're like, uh-oh. We're on top of a mountain and there's no way to get down because Wren's GT is dead. And Wren's lifting it up off the ground. He's like, put his fingers on the pad and he's tilting it forwards and it's going, ugh!
It made the world's most awful grinding sound.
And I threw out the idea, make it go backwards. Maybe that'll fix it. And it did.
I don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened. Like, honestly, the only thing. So this is a hypothesis. It's pure speculation. I think what happened, because it did get hotter than it should have been on for.
It should have turned off by that point.
I saw it at like 187 degrees Fahrenheit. I wish I got a screen cap. I didn't.
And at what point are we like cooking the board? What's a healthy range?
I thought like
what happens when it gets too hot?
So when the motor gets too hot, the magnets, which are just permanent magnets, like the ones you stick to your fridge, they demagnetize and they lose their ability to react to the stator pushing out, making it move.
They become dumb chunks of metal.
Yeah, and then that creates a compounding problem where the circuitry of the board is expecting a certain response from the magnets, and when it's not getting that response, it thinks it's in a certain orientation and it's not, and you end up with, like I said, a compounding effect of it just not working. That temperature at which magnets demagnetize is around 210 degrees Fahrenheit, right?
Something like that.
It's around that point.
Either way, you were tickling it.
I was tickling it for sure. And so what I think happened is that I think the glue became dislodged because the GT magnets, again, are only glued on the tips, not along the entire length of the magnet like they are in the XR. And so they're not held in as well. And I thought maybe it had just slightly come out from the thing and was now grinding along the stator as it's spinning around. And when I reversed it, it just went back in somehow and I don't know. I'm fairly certain I didn't have something stuck in the bumper or the foot pad. You know how sometimes you get like a leaf stuck in there? No, you didn't have anything
stuck. Remember you tried to ride it and it was constantly giving you warning beeps?
Yeah, it was super bizarre.
Needless to say, I'm a technological savant and a whisperer of computers. I'd like to remind everybody that when we filmed Son of a Dungeon, the computer wouldn't turn on and I went, turn it sideways, and I fixed it. So, you know, when it comes to dumb suggestions that fix things,
you're like the Fonz with a jukebox. You just know,
yep.
Let me hit it right there. Boom, problem gone.
So when it comes to bring this back to the VESC for a second, you will need to manage your own heat on the VESC. It's not going to overheat as quick as the GT, but it won't also necessarily tell you when you're getting too hot. You'll have to be aware of just like, you know, if you're making a race car, you have to be aware of when are you pushing it too far.
And what's the range? Yeah. What?
Basically, once you start popping, just like a CPU, once you start popping 70 degrees Celsius, you should probably get off the board.
Sure.
You know, realistically,
yeah.
Once you start popping 60, chill out. If you're starting to pop 70, stop riding. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thermal management is better with these rails because the rails essentially act as a heat sink. All the heat from the motor goes out through the axle block. It's essentially a giant, like 1-inch thick aluminum rod going straight through the center.
That create heat. We have 2 heat sources we have to worry about in the VESC.
Oh, I mean, yes. Well, okay, yes. You're talking about the controller, the MOSFETs inside the controller where all of the current actually pumps through, those things also get hot.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you keep track of the heat of your motor and the heat of your MOSFET. Depends on what app you're using. If you're using the float wheel app.
Well, okay. Actually, let's return to our little journey here.
Yeah.
We've got our brain screwed to our rails. We've got our battery in the box screwed to our rails. We've got a motor. There's not much you can do. You either get a Hypercore motor, or you get a Superflux motor, and you screw it to your rails and you plug it in. Like, that's all you do. You screw it to your rails and you plug it in.
Sure.
Okay. Now, the last thing you need is your foot pads. You screw the one on the battery, on top of the battery, just screw onto the rails. Done. Now, the one in the front is going to be one with the switch. There's a plug. You plug it into the brain box and you screw it onto the rails. It's that simple. Oh, bumpers too. Guess what? You screw them onto the rails. Now you're done. Your your VESC. Your VESC has been built. But
Physically, it's done.
Physically, it's done. So the next step is software. So there's a lot of in-depth tutorials on this, but I'm going to help give people an overview here. So the first thing that you're going to end up doing is you're going to need to calibrate it. So you're going to get your VESC app. You can run it on your phone.
It's called VESC Tool.
VESC Tool. Yep.
And it's a super janky app.
Is it through Test Flight or it's...
No, it's an app
available.
you can get. It's
Okay.
just the iOS version of it
Sure.
sucks. Fix it, please.
You fix it. It's
I
open
know.
source.
I know. I'm just being salty. Hey, listen, the VESC tool disconnects from my OneWheel every like 5 or 10 seconds, so it's very difficult for me to change settings.
Yeah. So heads up, everybody. If you're on an iPhone, because of the iOS and Apple, it disconnects from the Bluetooth consistently and then reconnects instantly on the VESC tool. Just be aware of that. You're going to be working and it's going to pop out and pop back in and pop out and pop back in. That's how it is. You're just going to have to live with it.
And it's fine. I'm exaggerating. It's not that big of a deal.
On Android, that doesn't happen. And if you use a laptop, that doesn't happen. Now, it's worth mentioning, though, if you try to use a Windows laptop to connect the Bluetooth in your brain, the VESC on your board, that's also not going to work. If you want to connect to your VESC from a Windows-based laptop, when you connect to it, first you connect to the VESC using your phone's Bluetooth, and there's a little box that you check at the bottom, which is, I think it's like TCP link or something like that, or port forwarding. You check that box, and then on your computer, you'll go to your Wi-Fi that the phone is on, and you'll type in the IP address of your phone, and then you can connect to your VESC to your computer.
It's convoluted.
It's a little complicated, but it's not that complicated, right?
But we
That
did all of our
describes
stuff
all
with
of
the
this.
phone,
Yeah, we did all of our stuff with the phone, so you don't need to use your computer, unless you're updating the firmware.
our iPhone.
If you have an Android phone, you can update the firmware from your phone, but on iOS, you can't. Anyways, so you're going to basically turn on your VESC. You're going to not have it on the ground so the wheel can spin freely. So like put it on like, a chair.
It has to be level.
Yeah, it has to be level. Put it like, so the tail and the front are like on two chairs.
Be like a
that.
milk crate.
Yep. Something where it's ideally the same height on each side, and you put it on flat ground. And you're going to run a motor calibration, and it's going to see how much current it takes to spin the motor and what the resistance is and that kind of stuff. The next thing you're going to do is there's a little IMU, an inertial motion sensing unit in the VESC.
Inertial measurement system.
Inertial measurement unit.
Inertial measurement unit.
Sorry. Inertial measurement unit. And that's going to that's the thing that tells the OneWheel which direction it's facing, is it tilted, etc. That needs to be calibrated as well so that it's pointing the correct direction. Because if you mount the VESC upside down onto the lid, well, the IMU is flipped upside down. Likewise, when you plug in your motor, it doesn't know which way the motor's spinning yet, right? So it's just going to spin the motor and hope that it's the right way. And you're going to have to tell it, yes, that's the right way, or no, reverse the motor, right? So there's a couple steps here. You're going to make sure your IMU is calibrated and it's flat and it's oriented correctly. So if your IMU has been mounted upside down, you're going to then rotate, you're going to offset it by 180 degrees rotation to flip it back over, right? Likewise, you have to have the motor calibrated to understand how much current it's going to draw from the system. There's guides for all this stuff. It's really not that complicated. The overview of all you're trying to do is trying to make sure the IMU is aligning itself correctly with the OneWheel so that it's flat and straight when the OneWheel is flat and straight. You're trying to make sure that the VESC, the electronic speed controller, knows how to communicate with the motor and how much energy it needs to communicate with the motor. And you basically run a calibration from one thing, you run a calibration from the other thing, you dial in some offsets if you need to, call it a day. You're basically good to go. After that, you have to tell it what's the current level to turn on and off for the FOOTPADS, which is about 3 volts.
Not the current, but like you're talking about the
sensor,
the fault state.
Yeah. No, when you...
Not the fault state. Yeah.
It's 3 volts. It's when you step
it's
on.
just not current.
Not current voltage. When you step on the sensors on the front foot pad, there's a sensor on each side. They put out voltage when they're under tension, and it's like 3.2 volts. So you're going to go into the app and say, if you get more than 3 volts, consider somebody on the sensor. At that point, you're into tweaking your OneWheel. You're into putting in the settings.
Now, what are the mains? No, there's a bunch of settings, like literally 100 different settings, and that's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
But you don't need to mess with most of them.
Correct. In fact, you're going to follow a guide to do your initial setups with how much current you use, etc. Just follow a guide. If you get questions, post questions on pev.dev or the Facebook group, right? Straightforward. I think there's also a Discord, but I never go there. All you're really going to mess with at the end of the day is your P value, your I value, and your D value for balance. And then the Mahoney KP, which is when we talk about our VESCs, it makes it sound super cool. Because like, yeah, I set my P value to like 26.5, but once I dropped the Mahoney down to like 1.9, it gave me a real stiff ride, which is what I was looking for.
Okay.
Dude, I prefer my rides a little bit less stiff, so I'll drop my P value down to like 22 and maybe bump the Mahoney KP up to like 2.0, maybe 2.1.
Yeah. So is Mahoney a
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's a name.
It's a person. It's
It's someone's name, and
they live inside of every
I think it's a mathematician that invented this like filter for it.
It's a type of processing motor control.
So what are we saying here? Basically, when it comes to a self-balancing device, it's going to use a PID loop to balance. Now, a PID loop is it's everything from running the air conditioning in your house, the balance on your OneWheel, to like, the charge of a battery, the water going into your garden with a sensing like water system. All it is you're saying, hey, I want to be flat. Okay. I want the board to be flat. And when it stops being, when you start tilting it, you're introducing an error, right? I want it to be at 0. Now it's at -1, or it's at -2, or it's at -3. And so the P value is going to say, how big is that error? And I'm going to give the same proportional amount back into the motor to fix that.
Sure.
Or, if it was your air conditioning, it would turn on your air conditioning by a lot or a little. The P value is going to influence that, right? So the P value is basically going to be how hard is your board going to fight to stay level as you ride. And so if you want a stiffer ride, you're going to raise that P value up. Now the I value is basically error over time. So let's say you're on your board and you tilt it just a scotch, right? You're at like
a scotch.
You're at -0.05. Instead of -1, you're at -0.05 degrees of tilt. But you're like, I'm at -0.05 degrees of tilt. I want to be flat. I don't want to be at -0.05 degrees. But if you're relying on the P value, it's only giving you -0.05 degrees worth of power. So it's not enough to bring it back. So what the I value does, it's going to add up that little bit of error over time. So like every tick, every refresh rate that is still there, it adds and adds and adds and adds until that number starts to become bigger. And that number is the amount of power coming back in. And then eventually it's going to push it back up.
Okay.
And then finally, the D value is dampening. It's going to kind of like try to slow everything down. And that's actually obsolete now. So it's just the P and I value.
Technically, the D stands for derivative, not damping, but in essence, in practice, it's just damping the.
Yeah. It's also not obsolete if you go into like an older version of VESC. Basically, set it to like 500 or 0. You'll be fine. So like I ride with a P value of 26. I ride with an I value of 0.15, and I ride with a D value of 500. Wren?
I think. Well, let me just double check.
Oh, come on! You just don't know off the top of your head.
Well,
you call yourself an enthusiast.
Wren's P value is I think 24. His I value is 0.25.
You imposter! I think this means I get your VESC.
And then there's this other value called the Mahoney filter.
Real quick. Okay, I'm at 21.8 for my P value. My I is 0.25, and my D is 1500.
Yep.
And I keep going back and forth between adjusting my I value to like 0.05 and 0.45 in that range. And it does change how it responds to like really consistently pressing it forward. And it's weird. I haven't decided what I like, but I have settled on 21.8 for my P value and my Mahoney KP of something. But what is it?
So the Mahoney value, right? So this is this weird thing that's often another menu. And Hannes was like kind of the first one to really delve into it. And it's basically, So I'm not a mathematician. I've read the formula. I tried to walk through it. I'm probably going to get it wrong. Please correct me in the comments if I get it wrong. But basically, the Mahoney is a filter that's basically going to estimate a position and then measure it based off an actual position. In my understanding of what happens when you turn this up, my understanding of what happens is the Mahoney filter is estimating your position off of the inertia sensors in the VESC rather than the gyroscope. So it measures off the inertia sensors, and then it uses the gyroscopes to double check if it was right or wrong. And then, it, kind of that's your error rate between the two. And what it feels like it does is, when you're on your one wheel and your one wheel is flat, it only knows it's flat because it's measuring it versus like gravity, right? And when you're accelerating, your up and down vector of like gravity changes a little bit, because you're adding some push forwards or some push backwards if you're accelerating or decelerating. And so by turning up that Mahoney value, you're letting it offset like that up vector to kind of match what your inertia is giving it.
Okay.
So rather than like decelerating and the board just stays flat and it feels kind of weird, like you have to like lean backward because the board stays flat because technically up is still just up. It's going to be like, well, up was up, but based on our inertia movement, based on the fact that you're decelerating, what feels like up to you is actually just tilted back a little bit.
Sure.
And then it's going to tilt the board back a little bit. So when you raise the Mahoney value, what's going to happen is when you accelerate, the board's going to lean forward. When you decelerate, the board's going to gently lean back. And it's going to be this nice, gentle, almost like waterbed style feeling. And when you're doing like intense trail riding and you want the board to be a little stiffer and like hold its flat point more, you're going to lower the Mahoney KP value. And likewise, you raise it if you want a really flowy, surfy, carvy kind of feel.
Okay.
There are other things to change in the app beyond that. They're actually pretty self-explanatory. Like there's a lot of like tune modifications.
The tune modifiers are what I have the most fun changing.
Yep.
So,
and I don't think we should actually get into those right now.
That's fine. But as a general sort of thing, nose tilt is really what most of the tune modifiers do. Depending on various situations, like are you accelerating really hard? Are you pulling a lot of current? Torque tilt is something that will lift the nose as you draw more and more current. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I'm able to climb those crazy steep hills because the battery and motor are capable of doing it. But normally the nose would just hit the ground and then you can't go any further.
Sure.
So there's a way to basically tell it, like as it detects more current being pulled, make the assumption that you're going up a hill, therefore lift the nose. Mm-hmm. And just as like a default, like lifting it as you go up more and more.
Yep. You can also do that based on your speed. And then you can also
how much
program
you're turning.
Your faults. So it's like once you sense I'm below, say 66 volts on my battery, just raise the board up and ride it Captain Morgan style, aka pushback, right?
Sure.
Or if it's at a certain temperature, or if this, there's a whole lot of things at a certain speed, you can raise the board up. So there's all these things in place that you can tune to have it kind of like talk to you, to have it ride different. But when you're starting out, don't have any of that on. I mean, have your fault sensors like turned on and stuff, but like just PID value.
Yeah, boost. I don't even use boost at all. I turn torque tilt on a little bit for normal riding, and I'll like crank it when I really need to like climb something. I do like turn tilt.
I love turn tilt,
which is something that I really wish Feature Motion incorporated more in the GT.
What we're touching on here is one of the beauties of VESC. And that is the tweaking. Now, some people are like, I don't want to tweak all the time. And I'm going to put this out there. I haven't touched my board settings for 2 weeks.
Okay.
I like my settings and I haven't had to tweak. And I've gone on multiple rides in different environments and I love how it's riding.
Because, a stock GT usually has like maybe there are 5 built-in modes and then custom shaping that will happen
someday.
At some point. And those don't give you, it's like it's a one button push to this solution.
They're presets.
Yes.
A preset is just a selection of settings in a specific way. And you hit a preset, it'll change all of those settings at once. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is no preset functionality with VESC. That's easy. There is technically, I think it's called Meter, M-E-T-R, but it's like a $50 module, like a Bluetooth module, even though it already has Bluetooth, that you got to buy and get its own app for it. And that allows you to save profiles of all of your different settings onto that chip. So then you can like change it out. One of the cool settings that VESC allows that Feature Motion just doesn't do is the ability to allow it to balance vertically, which is, you look at it and you're like, this is impossible. This shouldn't be possible at all. And you're like, yeah, but like, it's just simple physics. It works.
Cool party trick.
Right now, I can't just turn that on because I only have my one setting and a backup of that one setting. So what I had for a while, anytime I turn on the vertical thing, I back up the settings that allow it to ride like a one wheel, and then I will install the XML file from a laptop to make it stand vertically. And it's like, great, cool party trick. I can't ride it like this though, because you literally tell the IMU that it is to balance when it's 90 degrees offset. So you're literally changing its up position essentially by 90 degrees. So it does not function at all as a regular one wheel when you do that. And I have to it's a one-way trip. I can restore the settings, but I can't unrestore the settings.
Yep. Yeah, so there's lots to play with. There's lots to tinker with and tweak, but you will be able to dial in a ride that's exactly what you want, much more so than you can with a Future Motion one wheel. But on the flip side, if you don't want to tinker at all, obviously this isn't the route you should go.
Sure.
But that said, like, I don't necessarily like to tinker a lot. I like to tinker to get my stuff dialed in where I want it, and then I want it to be locked in forever where it is. Like when I set up my drum set, I spend a lot of time getting everything in the right spot, and I put down tape on the carpet, and it's like nobody move my stuff.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And to be fair, the VESC is at the point now where I believe you can get there, where once you dial in your settings, you can just not touch it and enjoy your wheel. You don't have to sit there and tweak it on every single ride.
But I do like being able to switch, like on the XR or the GT, you have aggressiveness profiles essentially. And those are the presets that you get. Like on the GT, you have flow, which I love, and you also have highline and then apex. Basically, it's a spectrum of aggression. How hard does the one wheel try to get underneath you?
Are you a Doom loading screen or are you a Doom like boss battle, right? I was trying to make a
loading screen. I didn't really see
game reference.
No, I got the reference. I just don't get the loading screen. Anyway, flow allows you to fall a little bit before it tries to get underneath you. Same thing as like mission on the XR versus delirium, which is like apex on the GT. Ish. Sure. Don't correct me on this. I don't care. Yeah, and so a more looser board with less aggression will actually like kind of let you lean forward and back, and that's what people have called like that floating effect. It feels like you're floating. It's really carving, but when you get more aggressive, it tries harder to keep the board level. Delirium, Apex, they basically don't let the board tilt at all. When you lean forward and accelerate, the board is still more or less level. And that's what the aggression comes from. So when you have it really aggressive, it also consumes way more energy too. So your battery doesn't last as long. So if you're running low on battery on an XR, switch to mission. If you're on a GT, switch it to flow, and you'll be able to squeeze out a little bit more range.
Yep. So you get into the software point at this point, you're using your phone to modify things. And there's a million different guides, a million different points of view on it. But at the end of the day, you get to just tweak. And it's going to ride okay just with basic settings. And you get to mess with it from there. And believe it or not, that's it. That's building a VESC. I know it's like a 2-hour-long podcast, but at the end of the day, it's build a brain. It's pretty straightforward. Get a battery, a little less straightforward, but hopefully more straightforward in the future. Put it into a frame. Pretty straightforward. Get your motor calibrated. That part's pretty straightforward. Get your IMU calibrated. A little less straightforward. But follow a guide. Watch a video online. Once again, Surf Dotto's YouTube channel. Amazing things there. And then after that, you're just putting in settings to make it ride how you want it to ride. And that's basically it.
Total build time from the point that you had to deconstruct an XR to it is now here and functional.
2 days.
It took us 2 days to get it up and running, but the first day was entirely for getting the battery going.
Yeah, I understand.
You could theoretically do it
and just filing and okay.
If you have all the parts on hand, you could theoretically do it in 1 day, but I'm going to say 2 days.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really not that bad. It's very approachable. It's a matter of having an overview, like what this podcast will give, and then knowing to look at the exact guides when they pop up and then asking for help when you need it.
Sure.
There's incredibly helpful people out there. This is an open source thing, right? So the open source movement, if something's wrong and it's broken, don't complain about it because nobody's getting paid to fix it. You have to fix it.
Fix the app.
You have to fix it. If you don't like it, fix it. And if you can't fix it, then help somebody else fix it.
Yeah.
And complaining to them isn't helping them, right?
Yeah, trying to provide like specific feedback on what isn't working, how you think it should be working, and maybe like steps
How to
to try
repeat
to
the issue. Yeah.
yeah. Try to be constructive about it.
Yep, be constructive.
I want to talk about the Superflex motor again real quick. This is the motor that is made by Fungineers. They're the ones who made our Thunder Rails, which we love the Thunder Rails. I currently have mine. You notice like the 6 dots on the side of it. You'll have to scrub. I put my Onewheel down. You'll have to scrub earlier in the video to see it. There's 2 axle bolts, and it allows you to lower or raise the board. I am working on a really cool snowboarding Halloween costume right now, so I have it lifted as high as it'll go. That is a tangent. The Superflex motor, part of the struggle of like making a video like this is that, you know, people can get excited and want to get into this stuff, but like, you know, Makers PEV, he's making these kits as fast as he can, but like the supply isn't quite there. The battery, like batteries, the batteries are sold out. The kits are sold out. The motors, which is why I'm getting on talking about the Superflex motor. They did 2 batches, and we're in the first batch. And I just texted you this morning that we got our shipping tracking number for the motors. So we should be getting those in the next week or so.
Sick.
Very excited for it. And then there's going to be a whole journey of actually getting that connected to the VESC because it's new plugs. You got to solder some stuff, get various things. My point is that do not be surprised if any of these components are difficult to acquire, but do not lose patience. You know, like the Superflex motor, he told me when I bought them that we should be getting them in like a couple weeks. That was 3 months ago.
I mean, all supply lines right now are
and we were in the
fucked,
first
so-
batch of like 50 motors.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then there's another batch of I think either 50 or 100 motors, and they're just getting through those first. But like we're talking like there's not many of these out there right now. Hopefully eventually there'll be a decent supply. Talking with one of the guys from Oak City over at Float Life Fest last month. They're dreaming of a world where you can walk into a store and just look at all the different components that you want and be able to build your own custom and have help building your own custom VESC in that store. But until like the supply can actually meet that, we can't do that. Another thing is that you cannot actually sell a fully constructed Onewheel device because of the patents that Future Motion holds, and they will enforce them, and they have every right to enforce them.
Every right, yeah.
I don't have any problem with that. And so it's like,
Yeah, that's the only reason the VESC movement exists is because it's open source, because it's people doing it out of the charitable kindness of their hearts. And when you enter that space, it's a wonderful space, but keep in mind that's the space that you enter as well. And ideally, you're bringing that attitude as well. So I think to wrap this up, let's talk about resources again here. PEV.dev is the forum to go for a lot of stuff, to talk to the people who are actively building the things that you are going to be putting into your VESC.
there's like dozens of us there now.
There's dozens of us. The VESC Onewheel Builders Facebook group. Another great resource. Of course, it's Facebook. I hate Facebook. Also, Facebook groups just kind of like feeds just fall off the page.
Yeah, I literally do not use Facebook at all anymore, and so a lot of these resources are on Facebook. It's very frustrating because it's like I feel like I'm missing out on news that comes out on various things.
Also, the Facebook Marketplace is actually quite good for Onewheel products. It's actually quite good.
So it's worth checking out this Facebook group, and especially if you want to talk to or reach out to anybody. You need help building something. You need to get a part. Like I said, can't find a battery. If you post, hey, I'm asking somebody to build me an 18-cell battery with a BMS, somebody will probably be like, I'll do it. Like, yeah, obviously it's going to cost you some money.
Yeah, sure. It ain't going to be free.
And you're not going to get it in 2 days, but like.
And it probably won't be cheap.
But it's there. You know, it's there. It's an option. Or even, I want to build the battery, I guess. Can anybody help me? Like, you'll find resources, right?
God, man, so we're not doing the enduro race. We're going camping instead.
Let me finish.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So pv.dev for the forums, the Onewheel VESC Onewheel Builders Facebook group. There is a Discord. I have not been there. I went and looked. I didn't recognize anybody that I know like in the VESC space. I didn't see Dotto or Max or like, so I can't vouch for it.
They might be on the Fungineers Discord channel.
Perhaps.
They are on the Fungineers. I've seen them there. I've interacted there. I haven't really been on the
So you can
VESC
check out the Fungineers Discord, I guess. But start with PV in the Facebook group. In regards to your parts, Makers PEV is going to be your holy grail here in America. In Europe, you're looking at Flow Glider. In fact, Makers PEV is like symbiotic with Flow Glider. If you're going to buy stuff from Makers PEV, you're going to have to buy stuff from Flow Glider. because they're the ones that sell the lid to all the pieces and the kit for Maker's PEV. Of course, you can get the self-assembled brain. Wonderful. But all the
He
cables
also
you
sells
need-
those parts from Flow Glider on their site too, right?
not the lids. And maybe that's a patent thing to make sure that the pieces are really separated.
Sure, that way, yeah.
Either way, everything you need brain-wise, electronics-wise, Maker's PEV, and then it's complemented by Flow Glider. And then, of course, if you're looking for 3D printed enclosures, check out Lit Timber. But obviously, hop on the Facebook group. There's options all over the place. Other than that, you get a used XR for your pieces. It doesn't hurt if you can afford it. If you have one. And that's kind of it.
I mean, yeah,
that's kind of it.
exercise safety, exercise caution.
Oh, sorry. Surf Dotto's YouTube channel. Watch all the videos that came out in the past 3 months. Just watch them all. Like every single tutorial, how to use the app. It's all there. He does a great job explaining it. Even how to set up the BMS and the CVCSO.
Oh my God, his video complaining. So a big reason why the batteries went.
We don't know if that's why.
We don't, but yeah. The BMS with the CVCSO wasn't correctly set up. Basically, it's there to protect the battery from being damaged.
Sure.
One of those types of damage is overcharging, and it'll shut the battery off, or the terminal will literally be disconnected so that you do not overcharge the battery. The problem is that the Onewheel,
when you decelerate,
it's regenning. It doesn't have a physical brake. It only has regen braking. And so when your battery is full, you cannot regen, which is why you can't go down a hill when you freshly unplug the Onewheel. And if you do, it'll start like leaning back on you and eventually shut off. And like that.
Do what that water bottle just dramatically did.
Clint killed his Onewheel doing that.
That was in the V1 back in the day, and
Yes.
it overcharged and something burned out on it. He had to send it in and get fixed. But so the CVCSO had a thing where that overcharge just cut off, like the emergency freaking eject button was set a little too low.
It's set to 85 volts, and the board charges to 84 volts. So if you brake kind of hard, you cross the threshold line.
And then
You have to set it up a little bit
Yeah,
higher.
we set it to like 86 volts, and
Okay.
I'm very careful when riding the full wheel too, because like
Yeah, sure.
our full charge battery. But yeah, so back to resources here. Maker's PEV for your brain parts. Check out the torque pack and the torque box.
Oh yeah,
from Badgerwheel.
badgerwheel.com. They
Badgerwheel.com.
got their start basically making waterproofing kits
Yep.
for the Onewheel.
I
Flow
remember them
glider
days, yeah.
for the rest of your parts. Float life for rails and some
Foot
pads.
pads, bumpers,
Yep.
fenders.
All
Pretty
that
much
kind of-
all of the
Also
Onewheel
Craft and
accessories.
Ride,
And Craft and
and
Ride will
Craft and
have
Ride.
it too.
Yeah,
And
Craft
they have
and
their
Ride-
own products as well that are very good. Foot
Yeah.
pads, they make very good rear foot pads.
Float life and Craft and Ride are for everything non-electronic for your
Yep.
wheel.
If you want to customize it or
Tires,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Oh yeah, they're really into the sidekicks. I don't know what the names are. Various.
Also,
Everyone
I
has
don't think
different
we've thrown them out yet, but maybe a good replacement for your light that you're going to lose upon VESCing are shred lights.
I love shred lights.
yeah.
It's my main light I use. Is
Yeah.
their I think they're 800.
and
the
they're
big beefy
homies.
light.
They're homies, and
Yeah.
make a good product. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then and then finally for batteries, Chai battery systems,
Of course.
Or JW batteries,
or GW batteries.
if they still make batteries.
And we're going to have links for all this stuff down in the description below, plus other places you might be able to look for some of these things. And that's pretty much it. That's it. Go out and build some VESCs. Tell us what you did. Share it with us. Share with other people.
Yeah, I want to
if-
see them build. I
if
want to
you-
see them build.
If you got tech know-how, please also bring that into the group. If you're somebody that can actually build batteries or wants to work with somebody else, make a standardized battery with BMS and box enclosure that fits in the XR platform and fits, like, please, you're not only going to make VESCs more accessible for us, you can make them more accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
So let's all join together. Let's all contribute. And let's make it so that we can build our own open source single-wheeled riding platform.
But here's the thing, though, is that like, I mean, yes, but it also opens up so many doors on what a Onewheel is.
Yeah, somebody
you know?
built one with like a 24-inch tire.
Yeah. But like what I want to, like, I don't know. I have all of these ideas. What would a Onewheel look like if instead of the standard length rails, they were twice as long? Like, it's probably not good, but you could. I'm kind of doing that with my snowboard costume project, but like I was also thinking a one-wheeled stool. what if you take the foot pads and just put them on top of each other above the one-wheel tire?
Oh, wow.
And it's a self-balancing
and just make
tire.
A little, yeah, sure.
Like stool type deal.
So
like,
EUC.
I mean, kind of, but like, kind of. It doesn't matter. My point is that like it could be anything. And so like I have all these different ideas for projects that, you know, aren't compatible with the standard blueprint of a one wheel.
Yeah, you don't need to use the Hypercore motor or the Superflex motor either. You
You
can
can use a
anything.
drone motor that's this big if you want.
In fact, the VESC, which is in the one
I
wheel,
mean, you probably couldn't actually use it.
can fly a drone, can power an e-bike, can handle electronic skateboard, can build a Segway, can build a hoverboard. The VESC can do almost anything that requires electronic speed control, not just one wheels.
Oh, yeah. So the Enduro race is November 5th here in LA, which is probably still before. It's probably still in the future if you're listening to this podcast the day it came out. I was originally going to participate because I wanted to use a VESC and basically throw in a 60-mile battery because it's a 50-mile race. I wanted to be able to have just a battery that I didn't have to charge because the enduro race is 50 miles. Everyone racing has to stop and strategically charge that, you know,
While
do
you're
you charge all the
staring
way?
at other contestants, chains and whips out, ready to go.
I'm super intrigued by
So
the race. I
imagine
really want to
never
participate.
pit stopping.
Yeah, so I was like, if I don't have to stop to charge, that's a huge leg up.
Huge
And so I was
advantage.
talking with like the guys organizing it, and they're like, we might not allow that. I'm like, okay, well, in that case, I'm not even going to try. It's going to take a lot of effort for me to, because I wanted to basically build an entire extra big battery pack that I could put in my backpack and have a wire going down to run in parallel with the battery inside the one wheel. So if it unplugs, it doesn't just die on me.
And once again, that's the beauty of the VESC.
Yeah.
You can do all that. So yeah, if you're out there with an XR, an old XR, or a broken XR, or you don't even have an XR, but you want to get into VESCs, like jump on in. Come join us. Come join us on the forums. Come join us on the Facebook group and start building and enjoy the process. It's super cool.
Dude,
So-
the newest firmware update literally was game changing. It literally changed everything.
Wren's doing drops off of picnic tables.
Yeah.
He's riding down cliffs. I'm
Yep.
not joking. He is riding down cliffs. He only made it halfway. He ran down the rest of
But
it.
there are certain parts where I was like really, really steep, and I'm able to just ride down it like it was nothing.
You
Granted,
were-
I think part of that was because I have my rails lifted and it gave me extra tail clearance.
Yeah, but that's a part of VESC.
Yeah,
right?
the night of the firmware update, you were hitting things without even thinking about them that like are very high level moves. And there was no like, well, this is on a VESC, this might not work. Which is when I was riding my VESC, like when we did the steakhouse ride,
Uh-huh.
it was like, I don't know if the VESC can handle this. It's going to be squirrely. Of course, it did go off the edge at one point.
Yeah.
We managed to get it back, even though it didn't have lights on it.
Well, dude, when my friends from Gravity Industries came over, I took them on a one-wheel ride,
Yeah.
and I had 2 GTs on my VESC. It was perfect. And so I had both of them on the GTs, and I was riding the VESC. But anytime I wanted to like show off and do something cool, I'd be like, hey, can I ride that for a moment? And I would get off of the VESC and get on the
Sure.
GT to do like this 2-foot drop.
Of course.
Because there was no way in hell I was going to do that on the VESC.
confidence, right? The
But now
trust.
it's
Yeah.
easy on a VESC. It just handles it. It's fine. And
Yeah.
I found myself more invigorated and excited about one-wheeling than I've been in quite a while.
Same.
And that's saying something because I am always invigorated and excited about one-wheeling at
felt
all
like,
times.
It felt like when I first got a one wheel again.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I was hitting you up like every night to go
Oh yeah,
riding.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, I hope this podcast was useful for everybody. Come join us in the open source movement. Like I've got a taste of it from the AI space now, and now I'm getting it
Yeah.
from the one wheel space. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful. I love it. So yeah, come make some VESCs with us.
Come crush some gnar.
Yeah.
Just crush that gnar with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just to like, as an end note, I want to reiterate, don't hate on Future Motion. Like, don't use this as like, oh, I hope they go
Yeah,
into the
that's-
ground. Like,
that's
you're not
crappy.
even making
Don't
a good
do
enough
that.
one wheel anymore. It's like, I want us all to live as in a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's anything I've learned from the VESC, it's just how nice the GT is.
Honestly,
Yeah,
that
frankly,
has been the
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
It gave me a new appreciation for how good the firmware on a one wheel is.
Yeah, that's what's gonna happen to you too. You're gonna build these wheels and be like, dang, the XR is a beautiful machine. The GT, it's a beautiful machine. These
Yeah.
are such nice machines. But they're like the MacBooks to the PC that you're about to build yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I want to maintain a relationship with Future Motion, and I was very hesitant about doing this podcast because I worried that this would hinder that. The last podcast we did, because I had a bunch of things that I had said, they wanted to address those things before they brought me on to be a commentator for Race the Rail, and I didn't get to be a commentator because of some of the things I said on this podcast. So I was very concerned.
I got to be an uncommentator.
Yeah. But there's no hard feelings. It was a bit of a miscommunications and problems and stuff like that. They're super busy. No hate on them for any of that. No hard feelings either. I would love to be able to go on their podcast here soon too. I just have no weekends free for the next month, so it's been very difficult. I guess a fear of mine is that this podcast we're doing right now might create a thing where I don't get to be on that podcast with them.
Well, if you would just stop accusing them of being reptilians for like 2 seconds.
I can't help it, Jan. Do you not see there's slits for eyes?
Oh, I see him, bruv. I see him. We just got to convince the rest of the world.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to join the OneWheel podcast at some point before the end of the year. I hope to make it happen. I've talked with them about doing it. I hope it happens. It's just a matter of finding time to drive up there and doing it.
Nice. And my hope is that by us making this podcast for the VESC, we're spreading more awareness, getting more people into the space, increasing the amount of people contributing to the project, so that in a few months' time, we see a more standardized system, easier access for more people to build them, better parts availability, more people out there crushing NAR.
Hey.
Like, I would love all that. And hopefully it takes some of the pressure off of all of us going to Future Motion and be like, please make this wheel for me that I need it. I need it to be like this for me. And now you can be like, well, actually, no, don't worry about it. I'll make it for me.
Yeah.
You know, you guys keep making the GT. It's a beautiful machine. Never ridden a OneWheel before? Go buy a Future Motion machine first.
Yeah, they're great.
But for the rest of us.
If you have no OneWheel experience, you're gonna have not a great time getting into VESC.
Yeah, you're gonna have no idea what it should ride like.
Yeah. Because I see people who are doing exactly that, and they're like, I'm like, you don't know what it should ride like. Because the OneWheel is the gold standard for what a self-balancing device should ride like.
I frankly think everyone should start on a V1 just to learn just to learn your foot placement and foot control. Like, there's
balance
nothing.
Control,
there's nothing like a V1 that'll teach you that.
Because Cliff still rides around on the V1, and I went riding with him last Saturday night.
Cliff
and
is so fast in the V1.
Yeah.
How is he so fast? He was faster than us on a mountain ride, and we were on XRs, and he's on his V1.
Well, he also weighs a lot less than us.
True.
He's a smaller dude.
Yeah, he's got
which I found is there's a very direct correlation between mass
overall,
and how like one of the guys at Float Life Fest named Niko is a smaller dude, doesn't weigh as much, and he was able to hit 33 miles an hour on his VESC before the recent firmware update.
Wow.
What?
Oh, speaking of miles an hour, it's worth pointing out too that when the firmware update came out, I set my personal lifetime top speed that morning.
Good job.
Same with me. I'd gone half a mile before I hit an all-time VESC record personally. I hit 20.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
GT
the day before I had set a personal all-time speed record of 27 miles an hour on the GT, and then the next day, don't forget, I had never gone above like 15 miles an hour on the VESC because it would get like too shaky. I'm like, I don't want to have to run this out.
Sure.
Because I feel like that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, cool, I got the firmware updated, went down the street, looked at my phone, was like, you just went 24 miles an hour. I was like, what? And you also, you've never really been a speed demon in my eyes.
I'm not a speed demon at all.
And like you're cruising, you're pushing it when you're hitting like 19 or 20 miles an hour, and you just hit 24 like it was nothing.
Yeah, that's how nice these are.
Yeah.
Also, there's no pushback to tell you that you're going fast.
I wouldn't have hit it. I have pushback turned on my board. My duty cycle is well below it. Like I was good. I could. I mean,
so your pushback is based off of duty cycle rather than speed.
Yes,
because you can change that.
Yeah, currently it's set to duty cycle.
That's actually something I would really love. That's the GT pushback is pretty aggressive, and in times that when you're going downhill, you can pick up speed so much faster than you even realize. And the last thing I want when you have an angle is your tail suddenly going toward the ground. It's like,
well, the initial firmware on the GT, that was a much bigger problem. Right. They actually came out with a huge overhaul on the firmware a few months after the GT came out.
I still notice it though. I mean,
it's still there.
Yeah. But I could hit 30 miles an hour on my VESC. I'm confident if I wanted to.
I might get there eventually.
I was at 65% duty cycle at 24 miles an hour. I could easily hit 30, especially on a slide downhill. But I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Ivy, if you're listening, don't worry. All right. Well, gentlemen, I have to get home.
Sure.
Yeah, this was a longer podcast. We are officially at 2 hours now.
This is a very important podcast for me because, I mean, just like you.
We've been talking about doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
And we're still talking about doing an actual like Corridor crew video something, but like finding the right idea hasn't really popped up yet. I thought maybe making like a 50 or 60 mile like battery for a race might be the thing, but
yeah, we'll see.
So it goes.
We're gonna go camping instead.
All right, everybody, thanks for listening. I look forward to reading the comments in this one.
Yeah.
Good luck building.
Maybe the comment section of this video can be a resource too.
Yeah.
If people have any
If all
questions
things
or
go well,
information.
yeah.
Share your stories.
Yeah.
I would love to see comments from Dado and Max and all those other guys. It'd be cool.
Oh, also, and Jimmy Chang, who on our last podcast made a re-edit of that. And I was a little frustrated because it's like it takes some of the words I said out of context and whatnot, but like,
what are you gonna do?
It's fine. He did take it down though, or no? Did he take it down or rename it? He adjusted it, which I guess I'm just trying to say there's no hard feelings on that. A lot of other people were angry on our behalf, I guess, and to those people, it's cool. Don't worry about it. Jimmy's a cool guy.
All right, so long, everybody.
Cowabunga.
And 3, 2, 1.